much I want to say publicly, but
Yeah.
You're good. Welcome to the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. I realized I made a typo on my thing, but we have Insanity is Free from Anarch Unity and also the Free Thought Project, Agorist Nexus. We have Rose from the Mises Caucus as well. We have two Mises people here tonight. And as always, Keith Preston. It's a pleasure from Attack the System.
Evening.
All right. So let's break it down. First, I have not been watching the LP noise. Well, I guess I have, but I need direct reference to what you're talking about. Are you talking about, something with presidential candidates? Are you talking about the open borders debate?
So basically, the general vibe is the Libertarian Party has, as always, been suffering an identity crisis. And a lot of people involved in the Libertarian Party have very splintered and different goals. And the goals of many within the party seem to contradict liberty. Like, I was told, and here's something that's going to make Rose laugh, because Rose is very much in these circles. I was told by Toad from Tower Gang that he is the front runner for the Libertarian Party, and fuck no, he's not. But if he is, maybe the Libertarian Party should get somebody who isn't a fascist LARPer, who pretends to be libertarian while also supporting, like, fucking anti-Jew lies of David Corbo and whatever anti-trans fucking bigotry he can. The only one thing that Toad is based on is like knowing that Javier Milei is a joke in terms of libertarianism. But like, Rose knows who the front runner is, and it is not Tower Gang Toad.
No, that's what I was gonna say. Like, some of this stuff is like satire, like people say I'm the front runner and all this. I mean, everybody knows Toad is not the front runner. That's like me saying that I'm the governor of California or something, which I'm not a complete psychopath, so it's not possible. But in terms of this, the one thing I have noticed on Twitter in between watching what's going on in Rafa, which that's the main thing I think that deserves the most attention now, is that there is a pretty robust debate between people who are open borders and people who are maybe more, I don't exactly know, because our opinions all over the place. I kind of have a Hoppe type view on immigration, which is, hey, since I have property, since I have a house, we just treat it like I invite whoever I want into my house, and people invite whoever they want into their businesses, and you go from there. If nobody really wants you, then I'm not being mean, but then, like, if you're a tourist, that's fine. I'm not against tourism either, but tourism generally you're not going to stay. So if you want to live somewhere, then I am pretty much an invitation.
Could you find me an immigrant who nobody wants? I feel like they couldn't be not wanted if they're also stealing our jobs. Because no, that's not true. What were you gonna say, Rose?
I don't want anybody. I mean, okay. I don't think you'd want an immigrant who per se is like super right wing or is super pro any of these fat.
And I don't think it's fucking up to me. Were you gonna say something?
Let's not. No, it's invitation only. It's up to whoever invites you. Just like a house, I wouldn't go into a house if I wasn't invited, and I wouldn't go to a country if I didn't have something to do there, other than tourism to stay. But I know
they have something to do here.
But I guess
I would ask, like, do you take the more Hoppe approach to like public taxpayer funded property, as in like the park, and like for instance a park down the street from your house, since your tax dollars paid for it? Are you kind of taking the approach that it's not technically private property, but you should treat it as if it is, whereas the people like where the people who paid for it should have use of it, and people shouldn't just be able to come in and use it? Because that's usually the argument I hear from the Hoppian style libertarians.
Yeah. So, and to be clear, I'm not a Hoppian style libertarian in the sense that, like, I have friends who are and I have a lot of friends who are pro LGBTQ and all this stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not a Hoppian in the social sense at all. I do like a couple things that my I'm probably gonna, I still love my anarcho syndicalist friends. I've been reading more in syndicalism than I have anarcho capitalism to understand it better. That being said, yeah, I still kind of have that stake of, okay, well, my tax dollars went to this thingy, whatever it is, so let's maintain that. Now, do I agree with Dave Smith in particular? I think Dave Smith said to the effect, we should bring all the troops home. I'm like, yeah, okay. I think all 99.9% of libertarians, except for Nicholas Sarwark, would agree with that.
Yeah.
If you want to consider him a libertarian, I consider him Democrat. Like,
He's a fed.
Nicholas Sarwark was the guy that was the former party leader, right?
yes, and he was. People say ANCOM. I'm like, dude, this dude was straight Democrat.
He was just an establishment shitlib, nothing more.
Yeah, we should have a discussion if we want to get involved in Ukraine. I'm like, if you're a libertarian, we're not getting involved in anything. My problem is, and you got to go after that, is that then Dave Smith said, put the troops on the border. I'm saying, look, we don't need troops. We don't need walls. What we do is we stop incentivizing. We stop giving free stuff because the government's giving free. If you don't give so much free stuff and you allow it to be invitation only, then people based on their merit and what they can provide for people and businesses can, just like any country, come over and do whatever they have to do. If they want to be tourists, they can be tourists. And that sparked a whole debate. And then my friend, I think, and then I saw like Jack was debating Dave, and they were debating over other stuff, and yeah, and then other people were jumping.
Here's the deal. Okay. If you say that nobody wants them, you're factually incorrect from libertarian principles, because libertarian principles dictate that the reason they are here is because of demand. And the demand that brings them here is the same demand that people like, the people claim they're stealing our jobs for, that all the low skill labor is being sucked up by these people. And why are they coming here? Well, because first off, let's just disabuse ourselves of this notion that taxpayer money is what funds this country. It fucking doesn't. And that's the reason this country is $33 trillion in debt. This country is not funded by taxes. It is funded by debt, and it is funded by participation in the global hegemony, particularly being at the head of it. And so that means that your tax dollars are not just going to installing water fountains for at-risk youth. What they're going to is like bombing foreign countries, installing dictators, destabilizing their shit, fucking their places up. And as a result of this, there's migrant flow from the places that were made worse to the places that are still okay. And so to speak in a vacuum as though these people are just coming over here from perfectly fine locations and stealing tax dollars so that they can, which isn't necessarily your argument, but it's certainly adjacent right now, to fucking be a sponge on the system. It's atrocious. It's ghoulish. It's not true. It's not happening. What is happening is that people who are in fucked up places, largely fucked up by the West, are coming here because it's the only place left that's not fucked up. And they need fucking places that they can go to after their places have been either bombed, destabilized, poisoned, rendered economically unfeasible, or otherwise destroyed by the countries that still have the wealth because they were the ones running that shit, so they didn't get affected. That's the truth. So it's not a matter of they should be stopped or on invitation only, treating this like a house. It's a matter of we should stop fucking other places up so that those places are hospitable for the people who otherwise wouldn't make the long, dangerous trek and potentially death by razor wire to get here.
Okay. I didn't say. Okay, there's a few things. I think the West has. And I listened to Shahid, Bolson about a lot of interesting things about the West. So my opinion of the West, I'm not saying I'm like the Chechnyan prime minister, but I've significantly changed my views on like the West is the best. That being said, I personally, here's where I'm coming down on this. I'm not saying they shouldn't come over. I never said nobody wants them. There's clearly people who want them. There's clearly good reason to come over here from Smedley Butler on, and I am a blame the NATO imperialist, complex first, or whatever you want to call it. My thought is that there's only a limited amount of resources, and I don't know the best way to manage that. I'm not an economist. And just coming over here, and then there's no way. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like you get 70 people who want to be part of Anarchy House, and you're like, no, just me, BT, and E or something. I don't have room for 70 people. But then they pitch out tents, and you're like, okay, well, I don't know if this is going to work.
Did I burn down their house?
No.
Then I guess they're probably going to stay in that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not. The West did destroy. What I am saying is, the optimal solution would be to help fix Honduras, help fix them where Haiti, help, because it's not really Mexico that they're coming from, and we can do that because we have Austrian economists who can turn around stuff pretty quick. And I'm not saying I like everything. Malay has done a lot of things I don't like, but with the economy, because he applied some Austrian principles, I do see some improvement, even though I think you should drop the US dollar. So to me, if they get rid of a lot of their drug lords there and they apply some Austrian principles and some maybe Kankian principles, I think they can turn around where they're at.
The drug lords are the result of not doing that. They're the result of the war on drugs. They're the result of a global criminalization racket. They're the result of installing dictators and gang leaders and all that shit. And what do you think these people are doing with their money when they get here? Just putting it in a jar? No, they're sending it back to their place so that their place can be rebuilt. That's literally a huge function of these people. And the Republicans and fascists love to claim that they're just draining the money out of this economy and sending it from our good jobs over there. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, these people send their people money so that their place can be rebuilt because the U.S. government ain't going to pay for shit. The U.S. government treats other countries like they treat houses they raid. The cops aren't going to fix fucking your door. The cops aren't going to fix your fucking, like, your baby's hearing after they unleash a flashbang near it. They're not going to do shit. The U.S. government operates on an international level the same way their domestic police operate on a local level. They fuck your shit up, and you have to pay for it. So that's the real truth here. They're like, aid, especially when it's done in the form of loans, is just a way of making other countries who deign to accept this their vassal states. They don't actually give a fucking shit. They're not rebuilding it. So the people come over here so that they can send money back, so that they can keep their family alive, because they can't otherwise. That's the truth.
I was going to say, like, part of the reason people are even moving here is because of U.S. actions in the global south. Like, not just, coups to overthrow elected leaders we don't like, but the drug war is a major part of it. Like, we'll have DEA agents spraying pesticides over people's crops because they might be growing coca plants or something. Like, we have thoroughly fucked up South America, and that's why people want to move here. So that's, like, I think step one, stop fucking around in other countries. And I feel like the demand for, immigration is going to drop significantly just from that alone, just end the, warfare state.
Correct.
Well, here's the thing about that. A lot of illegal immigrants in the United States are from El Salvador. I don't know what the latest data on this is, but an unusually high number of them are from El Salvador. And I've heard that I think something like a third of Salvadoran citizens now live in the United States. But if you want to know what the impact of the United States foreign policy on Central America is, I actually wrote a book about that called War by Proxy, and it's about the Civil War in El Salvador in the 70s and 80s. There was a 10-year war from like 79 to 89 that took place in El Salvador with the United States backing the Salvadoran government against a coalition of rebel forces. And that book, I wrote it about, was published about 10 years ago. I wrote it in the late 2000s. It was about, so it was like a 20-year hindsight about what happened in this war 20 years ago. But it's a good case study in what American foreign policy is really like. That's what I intended it to be. It's intended to be a case study. Like, if you want to know what American foreign policy is like, here is a case study.
And you talked about like the vassalization afterwards.
Yeah.
Assuming.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's mostly about the war. It's mostly about the war and the actual massacres and essentially genocides that were going on in El Salvador. It carried out by a regime that was it used to be called the Death Squad regime, but it was funded by the United States. The United States gave the government of El Salvador $1.5 million a day, and this is a country the size of Massachusetts.
U.S. government and funding foreign death squads. Name a more iconic duo. Go ahead. Sorry, I had to say that.
It's very similar to what's happening in Gaza right now. Israel is the new El Salvador. Gaza is the new Salvadoran people. In fact, Israel may actually be worse in terms of the population, relative to population side and casualty rates and stuff like that. But it's a case study in what American foreign policy's impact on the world is really like. But from what I'm hearing, though, it sounds like this is a debate among like Libertarian Party candidates about what the policy on immigration ought to be. The problem I see with that is, if you're talking about a political party and its candidates, a party really only has two purposes. One is to win elections, and the other is to spread ideas, a message in a more propagandistic sense or whatever. And whatever you think about immigration from a libertarian perspective, it's not really the issue for libertarians to focus on, because anybody in the United States who is a hardcore, immigration restrictionist is going to be a Donald Trump supporter. I mean, they've got a monopoly on that issue. That's like their brand name issue now. It's kind of, if you're going to run for office as a libertarian saying, I'm for immigration restriction, whether you are or aren't, nobody's going to care, because people for whom that's a primary issue, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. That's their man. You might as well be trying to compete with McDonald's as far as selling cheeseburgers or something. So it's strategically, it's not a viable idea. And even on a more philosophical level, even if you believe, well, philosophically, immigration restriction is compatible with libertarianism or whatever. Again, you're not going to really do much to promote the libertarian philosophy in a wider sense, because for the same reason, like people for whom that's an important issue, they're already Republicans and they're going to stay Republicans. There's not going to be any change. I mean, you're not going to bring a ton of people to the Libertarian Party by being an immigration restrictionist party, because it's just not that's not why most people become libertarians. Instead, it tends to be more of an issue that some libertarians bring with them. But all countries have an immigration restrictions. And you have a tendency within all countries or all cultures that prefers not to have rapid social change or rapid demographic change, or just doesn't like foreigners or outsiders or whatever. And you've got that in America too. Like you have the whole tradition in the United States of what they used to call the Know Nothings going back to the 19th century. And they were like the original MAGA people. They were like these conspiracy theorists that didn't like Irish immigrants and Germans because they were Catholics and thought they were going to turn the country over to the papacy of the Vatican or whatever. And that's the cultural tradition that Trumpism tends to appeal to, at least when it comes to the immigration and all that. So it's just sort of a losing issue. So I think that a Libertarian Party presidential candidate that was making that into their primary issue is just wasting everybody's time, because it's not going to be anything that's going to bring more people into libertarianism. It's not going to be an electorally winning issue either. So why bother?
We found
Yeah,
the more
that was-
iconic duo, the Libertarian Party and losing. Sorry, I had to. Go ahead, Rose.
I was going to say that was pretty much Jacob Hornberger's entire point, that anyone who has that stance on immigration is probably already just going to vote Republican, and thus we have nothing to gain by trying to pander to them. We're not running a presidential candidate to win the election. Okay, we're running because we want to try to recruit more people who may be like-minded. Because I mean, my entire point, like my entire purpose in joining the party was just so I could meet, more like-minded people. It gets, a bunch of people with the same views into the same room, so then they can, network and potentially organize on the local level. At least, in my opinion, that should be the purpose of a third party.
Yeah, well, it would be like, just strategically, it's not even a left-right issue, because let's say you had a libertarian candidate who said, okay, my stance is going to be, I'm pro-choice, I'm for abortion rights. That's going to be my issue. Anybody who cares that much about that issue to the point that it's a primary issue is going to vote for the Democrats. That's going to, I mean, somebody who votes and says, I'm going to vote for the pro-choice person, they're going to vote for the Democratic Party, because that's just, that's one of the Democrats' flagship issues, and anybody who has strong pro-choice views, that's what they're going to do. They're going to vote for the Democrats. So it's, and the thing is, it's like, it seems like some of these people are trying to, as a caveat, I don't belong to the Libertarian Party. I did once for about a year, I think, and I let my membership lapse, but that was 30 years ago.
Like what year was it? Was it with Sarwalk and
No, it was long before. It was maybe like 1993 or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, much longer than that. Yeah, I mean, I remember when Ed Clark was the Libertarian Party candidate. That was 1980. So it's in fact, that was the first time I ever heard of Libertarian Party. But yeah, but it seems like that some of these candidates, by emphasizing mainstream culture war issues, is the worst possible approach.
No, it's not.
Well,
no. Because I'll tell you why. Because these aren't candidates. These are podcasters and cucks with books and courses, and they don't give a fucking shit about any of us. So if they can, just sell their bullshit and then walk away into the sunset after getting a bunch of numbers off a bunch of public speaking things, they never cared about getting actual votes, so they didn't need to worry about strategy. It's perfect for them.
Well, people with that outlook should also be in the Democratic or Republican.
Yes, they should.
That's what they do. That's what they do. So, it's, yeah. So
if we're going to criticize,
yes.
If we're going to throw that accusation, Nikki Haley, I don't think believes she can win. She's trying to get more, I guess, publicity for Raytheon.
Yeah, she's running for the board of directors of
She's going to be president. I don't want her to be president, but she is clearly the establishment pick.
See, this is the thing that they always have to swing back and forth, R&D, left, right.
Right.
So it's like
people get fed up with one, so then they swing towards the other. People are like, oh, well, I'm going to vote for the opposition party. Of course, it's the same people, but
Trump is clearing her in terms of numbers, and they want public support. In terms of manufacturing consent, Trump is the manufactured consent option, and he has to have this mentality. He's the rogue. He's the guy who's got all this shit against him. No way, no way. And then every day he inches closer to it, so that the establishment can scare people and say, this is the most important election of your lifetime,
So do you think Trump is just controlled opposition? Because that was what, originally that's what I thought. But then when he actually got into office, the establishment's reaction to him, I'm like, okay, I guess he actually wasn't supposed to win. I think the campaign wanted him to be the candidate because they figured he was the one person Clinton could win against once they realized just how unpopular she was. But I don't think he was actually supposed to win. I think it was kind of a fluke, but I don't think it's going to happen a second time.
I can give you my take on that. It's kind of complicated, so bear with me. But the ruling class is not a monolith. It's not a conspiracy, and it's not a monolith. The ruling class, is what divided into a wide range of interests. But if you want to break it down to some of them in terms of some of the major interests, back in the 70s, there was a reasonably libertarian writer named Carl Oglesby, who said that a lot of American politics could be interpreted as what he called the Yankee Cowboy War. And by Yankees, he meant the traditional Northeastern establishment that's largely based in the New England area and goes all the way back to the founding generation, like the John Adams and all that stuff. But this is the traditional Northeastern banking establishment and financial elites that are in turn connected to the same kinds of elites in Europe. The Rothschilds and the Gianninis and Warburgs and all of these. These are people who essentially think of themselves as the American equivalent of European royalty. And some of the names are well known: Rockefeller and the Morgans and some of that kind of stuff. And that's really been the dominant faction of the American ruling class throughout most of U.S. history. And since the end of World War II, the main opposition has been what Oglesby called the cowboy faction. And this is the elites in the Midwest, the West Coast initially, that was rooted in the military-industrial complex. That is, people who owned industries that manufacture armaments and this kind of stuff. And in the 60s, when you started to see the so-called conservative movement develop with politicians like Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan, that's what they were. Like Goldwater and Reagan represented the Sun Belt capitalism, basically, whose base was really the southern and western manufacturing, like oil and armaments and all of this kind of stuff. And that's the cowboy wing of the ruling class. So and one is Republicans, one are most Democrats. And prior to the Reagan era, though, you had the Northeastern establishment essentially running both parties. Like if you look at the presidents we had in the 70s, Nixon was a Rockefeller Republican. Gerald Ford was a Rockefeller Republican. Nelson Rockefeller was even his vice president. Then you had Jimmy Carter, who was a David Rockefeller Democrat, who was a member of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations.
Fuck CFR.
Yeah, and then he had Zbigniew Brzezinski as his national security advisor.
Yeah, Zbigniew was fucking off.
Yeah,
He's part of Operation Cyclone.
Yeah, just like Gerald Ford and Richard Nixon had Henry Kissinger as their guy, But the thing is, the Brzezinski and Kissinger were both international advisors to the Rockefellers. So in the 70s, the United States was basically a subsidiary to the Rockefeller business and finance empire, and then the other ruling class interest associated with that. But then when Ronald Reagan took over in the 80s, that was a sort of an insurgency by the Sun Belt. That was the Sun Belt asserting itself against the traditional Northeastern establishment. And that's what movement conservatism is. Like, I have paleocon friends that call them conservatism incorporated. That's really what they are. But that's what movement conservatism is. And Reaganism, the Sun Belt wing of the capitalist class ran the United States as the dominant faction from roughly the time Reagan took over up through the George W. Bush era. And because the George W. Bush wing of the ruling class was such a disaster, that allowed the other side, the Yankee establishment, as Oglesby called them, to make a comeback as the dominant faction. That's why those sectors put so much money into Barack Obama. They were like, here's our man that we're going to use to reclaim our former position. That's exactly what they did. And if you go back and you look at how Barack Obama governed, he governed just like an old school Rockefeller Republican or Rockefeller Democrat. In fact, there were even astute conservatives who said that. Like, there was an article in the American Conservative magazine back when the Obama era who said, look, Barack is not a socialist. He's not a leftist. He's a Rockefeller Republican. Because he was comparing him to Nixon and people like that. Same thing with Hillary Clinton. She's basically a Nixon Republican. That her model of Republican of being a Democrat, neoliberalism, is essentially Nixonian. So the issue what this has to do with Trump is that when Trump comes along, what Trump did was revive a lot of older Republican traditions that had been dormant ever since the Reaganites had taken over the Republican Party. Like if you go back and you look at what the Republicans were like prior to both the Reaganite takeover and before the Rockefeller Republicans had full control of the Republican Party. Like if you go back look at the Republican Party of the 50s or the 1930s, 1920s, what you see is you had figures like Robert Taft, who was like an old school isolationist. You had politicians like Herbert Hoover, Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge. And this was sort of a Main Street, small town, Chamber of Commerce type of republicanism. And you also had the nativist tradition that goes back to the 19th century, like the Know Nothing Party from the 19th century. They actually had a party called the American Party that got fused into the Republican Party during the Lincoln era, the Know Nothings. And Trump revised all these dormant traditions that you saw in Republican or right-wing politics in the United States. And then as a result of that, the Reaganites and neocons in the the neocons, another story, but in the Republican Party, the Reaganites and neocons now had to share space with all of these revived traditions. And then the Northeastern establishment, who backed figures like Obama and Hillary and now Biden, they saw this as a threat to their own position, obviously. So that's why they are so adamantly anti-Trump. It goes back to this long-term, rivalry between geographical factions within the ruling class, and then they represent different class interests. Like nowadays, the Democrats tend to represent the upper levels of the capitalist class, like the super elite, the super rich. And then they formed an alliance with new capital, like what's called the new rich or the nouveau riche. They formed an alliance with new Wall Street, like the hedge fund manager types, or with, say, Silicon Valley, or at least most of it, or as well as big media like Hollywood and all that. That's all part of the Democratic coalition now. And then they also, another thing is that an issue that a lot of the elites have with Trump is that he is a nouveau riche. Because he's a German. He's like the American ruling class proper are Anglo-Saxons, but the Trump is a German. His grandfather was a German immigrant. So to somebody from the perspective of the super elite, that's like, let's say you're a super rich person, you're living in a big an area where there's a lot of big country estates and $10 million mansions, and all of a sudden you have these upper middle class people moving into your neighborhood. Well, that's like a threat to your own status on that level. It's kind of like when with like lower middle class people, they get upset if, say, blacks or like, say, poor whites or some trailer park type people, if they move into their neighborhood, they think they're going to lower the property value or lower the status of the neighborhood. But that's how the super Anglo-Saxon WASP, white Anglo-Saxon rich, that's how they feel about the nouveau riche. That's how they feel about the someone like Trump, who's a German, that all of that. And there's other issues too. But also, that's one issue they have with Trump. Some of this has to do with geography, ethnicity, class status, and this kind of stuff. But it's also true that Trump is like a maverick within his class, not so much in terms of policies, but just in terms of behavior. He's it's like, imagine if you had a big Fortune 500 corporation, and then the corporation has a CEO who shows up at shareholder meetings and he's drunk and he picks his nose during the shareholder meetings and farts and that kind of stuff. They look at it like he's not following the right protocols. He's like this uncouth lout that showing up drunk at a shareholders meeting. They stylistically they object to Trump quite a bit. There's also other economic differences, like the Republicans tend to represent the more lower to mid-range levels of capitalism, in the sense that they tend to be like the real base of the Republicans is like regional capitalism, medium-sized corporations, what the Marxists call the petty bourgeoisie. That's really where their donor base comes from. So it's sort of like lower capital versus upper capital, like the Northeastern banking establishment versus Midwestern Chamber of Commerce types. And there's also other rivalries, like somebody who's a billionaire tech entrepreneur nowadays is most likely to be a Democrat. I mean, there are exceptions, there are obviously individual exceptions, but somebody like that is more likely to be a Democrat. Whereas somebody who's a millionaire and owns a chain of car dealerships in the Midwest, that person's probably going to be a Republican. So that's a lot of the socioeconomic divisions. But the objection that they have to Trump is, like I said, it's rooted in all of these intra-ruling class rivalries, and some of them are stylistic. And as far as policy, there are differences too, because the Northeastern establishment, like I said, they view themselves as the American equivalent of European royalty, so they tend to be Europhiles. And that's why a lot of them are so anti-Russia, is because they look at it like, well, Russia's being uppity, and Russia is viewed as being a maverick within the Eurasian elite, which is always the status that Russia had to some degree. Whereas you have a lot of the Sun Belt people who are more unilateralist. They don't really care as much for the Europeans. They don't care as much for international institutions like the UN. They're more like American exceptionalist, or they really seriously believe in the traditional American civil religion, America's God's country and all that kind of stuff. So they tend to think that America should bypass the Europeans or bypass international institutions like the UN and just do its own thing. But they tend to be aggressive unilateralists. These people are not isolationists. They tend to be like, we should bomb whomever we feel like we want to bomb, whether the UN approves of it or not. It's also another issue is the Zionists. The Zionists have been very successful at embedding themselves in and gaining hegemony within both of the political parties and both wings of the major wings of the political establishment and ruling class establishment. But in the difference is that with the Democrats, they're a much larger coalition and represent a much larger range of interests. So the Zionist element is sort of embedded within this wider coalition. Whereas in the Republican Party, what they are today is essentially an alliance of the military-industrial complex and Sunbelt capitalism and the Israel lobby. That's really where their leadership comes from and their donors come from. And then on the mid-level and ground level, it's all of these, petty bourgeois elements, these small capital, medium-sized capital. And then you've got these Christian Zionist shock people that are like their shock troops. Like the Christian Zionists are to the Republican Party what the Wahhabis are to the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. They're basically a shock troops that are basically a cult that are used as useful idiots for this wider ruling class apparatus. And then the populist types that are fanatical Trump loyalists, they're the same way. That's exactly what they are. Another collection of useful idiots. I actually wrote an extended essay about this years ago where I talked about this. I talked about how the Sunbelt wing of capitalism managed to build itself a constituency by recruiting all of these right-wing sectors as like useful idiots, people that they basically use and abuse. I mean, they don't do anything for them, but, anything of value to them. But that's what they are. I mean, that's the kind of relationship they have. Yeah, but a party like the Libertarian Party needs to be something that is able to break out of this paradigm. Like just playing to one of these types of issues seems like a waste of time, because somebody that's like a gung ho on opposing immigration, they're going to be a Republican. Or somebody that's gung ho for pro-choice rather, they're going to be a Democrat. So I would say that libertarians should focus on issues that neither of the ruling class parties focus on, because that's what's going to draw attention.
I was going to say, war and central banking are the two main issues that I keep trying to encourage my fellow libertarians to focus on. That's why I joined the Mises Caucus to begin with, because they were the only part of the party that was actually consistent on these issues.
Yeah,
But
well,
we get sidetracked by culture war stuff. So
Also,
yeah, by focusing on that, those that's attacking the ruling class directly. By attacking central banking, you're attacking the ruling class directly. I mean, the banking cartels control both of the parties. They've got their hands in both of them. Like, I remember when John McCain and Barack Obama were running against each other, looking up who the major donors were for both candidates, and Goldman Sachs were in the top 10 for both.
Both of them.
Yeah, so that, I mean, so that these transnational elites fund both sides. That way, they're always covered. Yeah. So by attacking the banks, you're attacking the ruling class. By attacking the military industrial
and
complex.
That's how you can tell that somebody like Millay was never a serious libertarian, because if he wants to enable the U.S. central banks, then he's not trying to end the Fed, and he's in fact helping ours.
That's my biggest criticism.
That's what I said. I'm like, if this guy was actually anti-central bank, he would not be alive right now.
Yeah.
There
you go.
Right. What he is basically your standard Latin American puppet of the IMF, of which there have been, countless numbers of them. Yeah, I mean, first of all, if he was a serious libertarian, he wouldn't be trying to convert the Argentine currency to the American dollar. By doing that, he's just making the Argentina into a vassal state of the United States. Also, if he's a serious libertarian, he wouldn't be trying to brown nose the Israelis the way he's doing either.
Yeah.
Being for genocide is not libertarian either. So it's I think Javier Millay is a joke. I mean, it's I can't believe that many people have been taken in by him.
So
and I can believe it, because a lot of these people are fundamentally sold out.
Yeah. But okay, a couple questions I want to throw across here. I do agree. That was my biggest critic. People like, you don't like Millay because of this, that. Like, no, he adopted the U.S. dollar and he won't end a drug war. Maybe some of his economic policies are better, and I can say that's true. But I guess my question is this: that the other party that exists in America, that's smaller, who I don't agree with economically, but I was at the protests and I met Jill Stein, and she strikes me as a pretty good person. Not that I'm going to agree with her that like the environment is dying, and maybe I'll agree with John Zerzan that there are. I do agree that there's issues with the environment because of other things like topsoil depletion and big farms and stuff like that, and obviously the government changing the weather, things like that. So for me, would it be worth our time to, because I don't really consider Trump to be against the ruling class, for the libertarians and the Greens to work together as well?
He's not against the ruling. Well, he's against the current establishment, sort of, but like he just wants his own version of it. So yeah, so ally with the party is what you're asking.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying. They don't like him because he's not a team player. It's not that he's on the team. He's not a team player. It's
correct. Yeah, it's like this team player is a little weird.
Pretty much.
But should libertarians and Greens work together? Also, there's the Constitutional Party, which I think still exists. If we, all three, Libertarians, Constitutional Party, and Green Party, got together, I'm saying this just from me and Rose's perspective, because like I'm not going to push agorists to vote, then yeah, I think if we three got together, and yes, my biggest criticism of Millay that everybody knows is, look, I want Latin America and other countries to be free of the U.S. empire and of BRICS. So how do you do that? Well, the best way I think to do that is not to adopt the U.S. dollar. I'm not even worried if some country likes this country or that country, or if they whatever they do, they can. The country I have the biggest issue foreign policy is the UK and the US, because they do get involved and do stuff. So for me, that's what I'm thinking, is if we build multiple coalitions, not just Mises Caucus or C4SS, and not just ANCAPs, ANCOMs, and ANPRIMs. I think that's good to do too, syndicalists. But also, if we have, I will agree with Jeff Berwick, even though I don't think his practices maybe have been sound in the past. If we have the political system, we might as well use it. If I buy you a set of tools and I tell you not to use a specific screwdriver or a saw, you're probably not going to agree with me. And that's kind of how I see politics. I don't like it. I fundamentally, at my core, actually agree with Konkin over Rothbard. But if we have it, might as well play the local and state game. And the Constitutional Party exists, the Libertarian Party exists, independents exist, and Greens exist. Is it worthwhile to expand the Great Tribe that way, Keith? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like the idea, but there are a lot of obstacles to that because I've actually been involved in comparable projects before. And the problem is in the United States, we have a society that is so fragmented now into these warring cultural tribes that all of that stuff ends up creeping into every group or every tendency. Like if you're in the Libertarian Party, I'm sure you've seen this, where everybody is racist or fascist or communist or anti-Semitic or male chauvinist pig or
To be fair, though, that's true about a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not that people like that don't really exist.
I mean, the alt-right thinks that we're a Jewish plot to undermine Western civilization or something. So, because I mean, most influential libertarians have been Jewish. So,
I mean, okay.
The hardcore anti-Semites believe both capitalism and communism are Jewish in origin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm honestly getting tired of that. Like, here's the thing: if an idea is a good idea, then I actually don't care the ethnicity where it came from. Like, nobody's like, "Oh, I'm not going to use zeros because Arabs came up with zeros." That's kind of getting, yeah. That's
don't give anybody any ideas.
Yeah, like
no, I've seen stuff like that. I know years ago I saw something on a white nationalist discussion board where some idiot was lambasting someone for using the word tsunami just in a descriptive sense, like we face a tsunami of trouble, and that person said, "Why are you using a Japanese word?" And it's like,
it's getting
it's
dumb.
not like English borrows words from a bunch of different languages or anything.
But see, there was a thinker I really loved back in the early 2000s when I was an ANCAP, and I learned a lot of ANCAP philosophy from them. And if you want, it was Stefan Molyneux. I was a big Stefan Molyneux fan back in the day because I was learning about, okay, what's peaceful parenting. He had some good rational arguments, in my opinion, using deductive reasoning to get to anarcho-capitalist principles of things like, non-intervention, free banking, But the problem I had with him is, yes, he went off on the Trump train and started talking about all these crazy things, that this race or that race. And I'm like, I don't do that. I specifically sit there and listen to an argument and say, okay, based on what you're advocating, what's going to be the end result of this? Most likely. I can't tell all the time. But what's going to be the end result of this? And is this a good idea or a bad idea? And the interesting thing is, a lot of people want to point like, well, the creator of this was this, or the creator. I'm like, I don't care. I care if this will work or not. Like the most recent example of this is, I'm not looking at Rudolph. I can guess Rudolph Rocker probably has. Actually, I don't even know what his ethnicity is, nor do I care. But the whole argument that syndicalism or every left-wing economic thing always leads to shortages is not true. Twin Oaks. I don't think Twin Oaks is having a shortage crisis that I know of. And like I asked you, that was my question to break it down, although I haven't. I actually do want to post that response you gave me. I might have to scroll up, but the whole notion of like, is an idea good or bad? Let that be the judge, because I think that, there's misconceptions and even how people understand the ideas, let alone like who created them. And if you can get past that, like, does syndicalism always lead to shortages? Is it anti-free market? No, it's not, actually. So I think that's something people need to look at. Is this idea a good idea? Is it going to work in the real world or not? If it is, okay, implement it, test it, see what happens. If it's not, then it doesn't matter. So for me, that's the only thing that matters. I think people are getting too caught up in this came from that guy, and that guy's from this, and this guy is this, and that's my issue. And I can dissect certain things and say, is this good or bad? And that same thing with Javier Milei. Okay, I can agree with some economic policies, but get off the U.S. dollar and the drug war, and then
What economic policies do you agree with from him?
I believe in cutting as many departments and regulations in government as humanly possible if you don't get rid of all of them.
He's not really doing that, though. He's just consolidating power.
The problem with these kinds of neoliberal politicians that are into deregulation and that kind of stuff is that what they do is they engage in a type of selective deregulation, which means that they are politically connected crony capitalists. They might deregulate some of that, but often they end up expanding the full volume of regulation. Like Republicans in the United States, Republican presidential administrations are famous for that. On one hand, they may selectively deregulate crony capitalist enterprises that are connected to the Republican Party, but then they often expand the number of regulations overall. So it's like by the time a Republican president leaves office, they've actually created more regulations. And then I don't know what the exact record of all the different Republican administrations has been, but that I have seen that before. I know that was the case with the George W. Bush administration. I'm not sure about Trump.
Now, Trump expanded, like, to me, that people did the whole trick of, Trump got rid of regulations or he did that or this. If you take money from the EPA and put it into defense spending, it's not cutting. You're just rerouting. It's like saying, oh, I got spending on my groceries and now I'm going to spend that on, like, alcohol. No, you didn't cut anything. You just rerouted.
You spent it on something worse, yeah.
And they made the Space Force. I'm like, what does the Space Force do? It's just an extension of the Air Force with a different thing. And then on top of that, he engaged in deficit spending. So he didn't really cut spending either. So to me, the whole Trump cut anything is really just kind of a myth to sound good. And if you actually peel back the branding of Trump, like you get rid of all the, like, the flag hugging and the ideological superstructure and, my dad was an American and, I love blue collar workers and I barbecue every Sunday or whatever it is, the typical, I guess, boomer con, environment, then really, if you look economically at Trump and Bernie Sanders, they're very, very close. And people freak out. Wait, are you saying that Trump is just like a regular or basically a Democrat like the rest of them? In the sense of just spend. Yes. I mean, honestly, I don't know William F. Buckley. I don't really like the fact that he was a Cold War hawk, but at least from what I understand, he wasn't insane on spending. So I could be wrong.
Yeah, I made that observation
Yeah.
For basic, like the Trump and the Bernie crowds were extremely similar, but they would always get really mad if you pointed that out to them. So. Yeah.
Well, all the presidential administrations are super spenders. The last one that came close to being anything remotely resembling a fiscal conservative was Bill Clinton, and that's only relative to some of his predecessors and some of the ones since. It's like, I remember when Ross Perot ran for president in 1992. Our national debt was $4 trillion, and that was one of Perot's big issues. Well, it's outrageous that we have a $4 trillion national debt. And nowadays, a $4 trillion national debt would sound like nothing. Now it's 34 trillion or something. That gets back to what I think is one of the limitations of electoral politics, in the sense that my view of electoral politics is that actual policies, at least for the big stuff, foreign policy, major economic policies and all that, those are made not on the basis of elections, but they're made on the basis of the prevailing consensus of the dominant ruling class factions. And you have, pan ruling class factions and interests that have the same basic interests when it comes to everything. That's why if we did what Rose was saying, and we started focusing on attacking war and central banking. Now that's attacking the ruling class proper, because that's a consensus issue. That's a pan-ruling class consensus. They like the Federal Reserve arrangement. They like the military-industrial complex. They like the empire. They may differ on how to manage some of it or what the specific focus and emphasis ought to be. The Democrats tend to be more multilateralist. Republicans tend to be more unilateralist, but they have the same core interests. And that's what decides policy, not elections per se. Elections are more like a coronation ceremony, where you're basically conveying legitimacy on the state by saying, "Hey, we had an election, right?" But the policies have already been determined. The policies are going to, and there's a lot more continuity between Democratic and Republican.
Keith, Jordan, if you're familiar with Jordan Maxwell, I think he was a really good thinker. Now, he does go into the metaphysical dimensions quite a bit. He was in a lot of Mark Passio circles, but he said, let's think about elections. What do you go to? The polls. What happens when you have a poll at a company? They say, like, okay, we are going to implement these policies of whatever the policy is, email, this, that, maybe like, okay, vacation. We're going to implement these policies anyway. But but polls at a company, but who would you like to see implement these policies? Not that the policies be different, but who would you like to see do it? And he said the polls are the same thing. We got the plan laid out, and people actually are starting to catch on. They're like, well, we have someone who's not all there, but still the policies just keep on moving. Literally, you could just, honestly, in my opinion, elect a dead guy, and then the policies would keep on moving. You could elect a dog, and someone did that actually, which is funny, in a town, which, hey, good on them. It seems to me it just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling, no matter what you put in there. But I guess to ruffle some feathers, especially in a left-wing thing, for me, another way to seriously disturb the ruling class and to make some good headway are some of these different movements that my friends who are not even in the Libertarian Party, and some of them are, advocate. Like some people, like when I hit up one of my business mentors, he's from Hawaii. I'm like, hey, while you're not doing business, get mad and tell them give Hawaii back to the Hawaiians. Or I have a friend, Leighton Radner, who me and Jeremiah have been on a show. He talks about the Joe Vogler movement. And of course, I do have friends who are, I guess, they call themselves Dixies. And they're like, let's spread it apart. I'm not saying I like status, but if I had to pick one out of a hat, it would not be Putin. It would not be Trump. It would actually be, well, I like General Lee and Jefferson Davis. So does it disturb the ruling class to talk about peaceful divorce? Does that scare them or not?
There is no peaceful divorce. So just to be clear, like, the reason that people are talking about national divorce right now, and I've said this on multiple other streams, the reason is because Texas wants the ability to push families into water filled with razor wire, and the governments that are supporting that, those governments are directly responsible for some of the most expansive state policies that we've seen. These governments are supporting this the government of Texas's right to be a tax farm that has cattle behind razor wire and keeps the terrible evil people from outside of our precious perfect country away from our waters by putting razor wire in it so that they can make razor water that they push the families into.
But wait,
let's be super clear here. This is not a peaceful divorce. And the most brutal, bloody empire in fucking history is not ever going to just peacefully exceed. It's not going to fucking happen. So when people act like these people are just going to roll over because there are a significant amount of numbers, which would be what would be necessary for peaceful divorce, that isn't real. It's a pipe dream. It won't happen. The empire has maintained itself through blood and violation this whole time. It's not going to stop now. It didn't stop during the Civil war, and it doesn't stop. And it doesn't stop anytime the fucking people start to do something different. It didn't stop during Waco. It didn't stop during Black Wall Street. It didn't stop during the Philadelphia Move bombing. It didn't stop during Ruby Ridge. It didn't stop during the BLM protests. It didn't stop during the other BLM protests on Bureau of Land Management land. It didn't stop during the Occupy protest. It didn't stop during the Yellow Vest protest. It didn't stop during any of these protests because they don't fucking give a shit. So when these people see people protesting or asking nicely, when these people see people going through the standard channels of democratic or peaceful arbitration, they're going to go tell you to go fuck yourself. And the biggest, like, you know, the most optimal circumstances will be that you get pepper sprayed and the fuck beaten out of you. That is the most optimal circumstances if you try peaceful anything. These people are not peaceful, and they will not accept a peaceful solution. They will not accept a peaceful divorce. This isn't a divorce. This is a war. Treating it like anything else is dumb.
Here's what I would say to that, though. Sorry, Keith, you're muted. But here's my thing. I don't agree with pushing families into razor wire. I don't agree with pushing anybody into razor wire. For the record, here's the thing. There are people, I've talked to them, and I brought up the point. Look, the whole stated purpose of the federal government, if you believe the stated purpose of the federal government, which I'm an anarchist, so I don't see one, but the intended purpose was to protect, the biggest thing was to protect interstate commerce, meaning Pennsylvania and New York are fighting. Please make them, be friendly. Kind of like panarchists would be like, yo, hey, my friend here wants to live in the woods. He cool. My friend who wants to use, robot chips in his hand, they good. Just like, don't beat each other up. Go hang out in the solar punk place, or like, hey, let's come up with a mutualist agreement between ANCAPs and ANCOMs. The whole point of the federal government is to do that with states, and they're failing at that. So my argument was this. Look, we need to, and actually I was on A Spaces with Clint, and they said the same thing, 14th Amendment, you can't peacefully divorce, but they said there's a guy in Texas named Ken Paxton who wants to try it. And I don't even know the guy or his policies, but we have, and maybe the Alaskan Independence Party is an issue. But to me, I still believe, I fundamentally believe, just like the people said the Soviet Union back in the day could never collapse, they have the best space program, they have this, they have that. And look, Soviet Union doesn't exist. European Union, I don't think will exist. I believe David Friedman was right. He said the United States too big, or not David Friedman. David Friedman said the United States too big. I think this is time for a peaceful divorce, which would be better for everybody. And look, if a state takes a stance I don't like, that's fine. Here's the good thing is other states act to counterbalance. All I'm saying is the world isn't perfect, so have more nodes of failures. So to counteract these different things. It's just like saying, I want one cryptocurrency. Well, how about 20? If one becomes bad, like there are cryptocurrencies that get taken over more. Let's say, like someone asked Jeff Berwick, well, what if the bad guys get Bitcoin? And BlackRock has 10 billion in their ETF. And then people come to me and say, look, Kareem, crypto's all bad because BlackRock and Rothschild have some. And I'm like, bro, listen. Fine. Let's say we lose Bitcoin. We still got Monero, so it's not like and that's all I'm saying. Let's say one state does suck. How does it apply to states? Let's say Texas comes up some weird theological ways to govern. Maybe Alaska.
It already does.
Okay, let's say Alaska and Hawaii do things right. Let's say Pennsylvania does.
Hawaii is using their religious bullshit to ban guns right now.
But it's still okay, fine. But here, look, I still think it should be left to the natural Hawaiians. How about this, Jeremiah? Let me throw a curveball at you. Let's say we have pan-anarchism. Let's say we have ardent Second Amendment supporters. I can even ask Keith this. What happens if anarcho-primitivists, which have every right to do, say, don't bring guns here, that's advanced technology? Like, I don't think Jared Jensen or somebody who follows Zerzan would like you to bring guns there. So let's say they ban guns. Are you okay with that?
John Zerzan probably wouldn't have a problem with guns. I don't think he does. I think we shouldn't put words in their mouth, and I think a lot of ANPRIMs use guns.
I'm not saying John Zerzan has a problem with guns. I'm just saying someone has an anarcho.
If they do it on their own property and in their own territory, perhaps, but that's not a curveball. The curveball would be me saying that Texas is already a theocratic state, and the governor of Texas is an evil piece of shit. We went over this over multiple streams. So the idea, the idea that fucking secession of Texas would result in a better state, no, it would just let them isolate their power. That's what this would do. And the thought that they wouldn't immediately reform, the thought that they wouldn't immediately either coalesce into a federation of different states or reform as, yet another civil war, the idea that like hostile nations wouldn't take advantage of a civil war, and that's why this hasn't fucking happened yet, because these governments know that they need to preserve themselves against many national and international threats. The idea that this would just go kumbaya because, like, if one thing failed, people could move, when people can't afford, like, I'm fucking broke. I know so many Americans who are fucking broke. The idea that if you don't like it, you can leave is such an elitist, privileged cunt thing to say. And it's the kind of thing that, like, statists love to say. So why should libertarians echo that sentiment? If you don't like one state, leave to another. If you don't like this state that seceded, leave to a state that seceded that you like more. There's going to be a point at which all of these states that have people leaving have 100% homogeneity in terms of their culture and in terms of their ability and willingness to accept and convey control. And the idea that these people would somehow be fucking awesome because they seceded and because they had a divorce is garbage. Divorced dads and moms suck all the time. Ask any kid of one. So, like, the idea of a national divorce sounds good on paper to those who like to jack off to Confederate flags, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, it doesn't actually render liberty in practice. It renders a bunch of states who finally get away with the shit they wanted to do. That's the reason that southern states all wrote in their letters that they were doing it partly because of slavery, because they wanted slaves. And the idea that, like, because, like, these people are breaking away from a more massive union, that they are somehow going to be more ethical when they were not ethical members of that union to begin with, is a compositional flaw. It fucking sucks. It's illogical bullshit.
Well, I tend to look at these kinds of questions more from what I call an operational perspective, in terms of, empirically speaking, what is likely to happen in the event of a particular scenario, not necessarily what should happen, or what would be the optimal in a more idealist sense. But as far as Texas or somewhere like that becoming an independent country, that's not going to happen. I mean, the United States is not going to let a state like Texas or California.
Well, no, it ain't.
Yeah, simply leave because they're too important to the wider U.S. economy and all of that. That's just not going to happen. Now, I think if Texas simply became an independent country, it would basically be kind of like West Saudi Arabia, in the sense it would be a state located on a Gulf that's oil rich and has a theocratic government run by oligarchs. That's the kind of system that Texas would have if it was an independent country, only Christian rather than Islamic. But so it wouldn't be a good place. Well, I don't know. I guess people who that's what they want. Maybe some people want to live in a society like that. So I guess for them it would be good, but it wouldn't be good for anyone else. But it's not going to happen. I mean, there's not going to be an independent Texas that simply leaves while the rest of the United States remains intact. The secession in the United States is not going to be something like the Civil War either, where, say, half the country goes, because we don't have those kinds of sectional divisions that they existed back then. The way the United States would break up would either be like the Soviet Union, where the state simply collapses, the central government collapses under its own weight due to loss of legitimacy and incompetence and all of that, which didn't necessarily produce happy results in the Soviet Union, because in the 90s, the average life expectancy dropped by about 20 years, from like 70 something from the Soviet era to 50 something during the Yeltsin era. So, I have friends that are from Russia that grew up in the Yeltsin era. And, they said it was basically just one big ghetto. It was like living in like some of the worst ghettos in the United States in terms of the violence and poverty and all of that. It's also possible that you could have something like the United States breaking up along political lines where you have something similar to what they had in Japan and shogunate Japan at one point, where you had multiple shoguns claiming to be the real ruling dynasty. So you actually had like 3 or 4 governments within Japan claiming to be the real government, and then they were actually able to exercise control in those regions where they tended to be dominant. Now, I could see something like that happening in the United States, where you have the government fractures to the point where you have like the blue party says, okay, we're the legitimate government, but they can only really rule in blue zones because that's where they have support and a base. Or the red party says, no, we're actually the real government, but they can only really exercise control in red zones. And then you've got these kind of interstitial areas, the purple zones or gray zones or whatever, that are able to do their own thing. I could see that happening. Now, whether that would be optimal or ideal is a different question.
And that's what Justin Moan wanted, and he cut off his dad's head because he thought the feds were in the way. That's the kind of
crazy guy. Is that crazy guy that like he was like some schizophrenic, paranoid, delusional guy? He murdered his father, but he was into conspiracy theories. Okay.
Yeah, and he personally, he said that he was the president of the United States. He declared himself that, and that he was going to lead the global militia against the establishment, and that's why you should, off your Fed family members, anyone who's a Fed, but not anybody who's a state government person, because the state governments are constitutional. The federal government is what's the fucking traitors, and the federal government needs to be crushed. Just them, though. Just them. Don't leave my state governments alone, because I want to rule them. I'm calling myself the head of the militia. Every militia's members come to my behest. That's the kind of insane motherfucker that thinks that the state governments have states' rights. Fuck states' rights. States' rights don't exist. What exists?
Well, a lot of our states are larger than any other country.
Was that a Fed after all? Like, was he actually a Fed?
He worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. He was the least harmful Fed.
Okay.
It sounds like he was a schizophrenic. Usually with those kinds of delusions, that's what's going on there. There was a case like that in my area a few years ago. There was a prominent lawyer. He was murdered by his son, and his son was a schizophrenic and had these weird, crazy ideas that his father was the devil or something.
Yeah. No, I used to be more open to the states' rights argument, but that's the problem. A lot of these, a lot of them don't, they wouldn't actually be better for individual liberty. In fact, they'd be a lot worse. So, yeah.
Well, a lot of our states are the size of most countries. If you look at a map of Europe and a map of the United States, a lot of their countries are smaller than a lot of our states. So it's not really. That's not anarchistic in any sense. And you could argue it's better or worse, but it's not really anarchistic. I used to write a lot about secession and issues like that. I don't as much anymore because it's almost a mainstream issue now, because people talk about the national divorce and that kind of stuff. But national divorce wouldn't necessarily be libertarian or anarchistic.
It
could easily be the opposite.
Not be.
Yeah.
It would absolutely not be. Fuck these people. Holy shit. Every one of them, except very few exceptions, who wants national divorce is a piece of fucking shit when you scrape below the surface.
Well, I like the general.
The argument I would make for the national divorce argument is this. I would say that I think it would have the effect of just disrupting or dissolving the American military empire and its drone wars and its invasions of other countries, and it's funding genocidal states and stuff like that.
For them,
that's what I said.
Not for BRICS, who would almost certainly take advantage of a balkanized America.
Well, that's a really interesting argument, because when it used to be that when I would write about geopolitics a lot, I was writing during the George W. Bush era, or the Clinton era, when we had a unipolar world order, unquestioned American hegemony, and Bill Kristol's idea of benevolent global hegemony and all that nonsense. But it is interesting how we're moving into this world now that I think is increasingly, we can argue about how far it's gone and how far it's really gone this way, but I think the direction we're moving in is more like the year 1900, before the two world wars, where you had multiple poles of power. Like in 1900, the British Empire was the largest player on the field. And then you had the European colonial empires. There's about 7 or 8, 9 of them that had their own spheres of influence throughout the global south, what we call the global south today. And then you had the Russian Empire, the Tsars. Then you had the Ottoman Turks. And the United States, interestingly, was kind of like what the European Union is now. It was a continental power that was very economically powerful, but hadn't really become a world military power yet. And also Japan was rising at the same time, too. And that was the world order of 1900. And nowadays it's very similar, where the American empire is more like what the British Empire used to be. It's now the biggest player on the field, not the only player. China's becoming almost like what France used to be, because their sphere of influence is throughout Africa and through some of these Asian trade routes and stuff like that. And then Russia, Putinist Russia, is basically the old Tsarist Russian Empire. That's really what it is. I mean, I watched Putin's interview with Carlson, and Putin laid out his whole geopolitical theory, and all it was just straight Tsarism. I mean, one of the Tsars from the 19th century could have been saying the same thing. And then you have with Erdogan, you have the Ottomans or the successors to the Ottomans rising again. So it's a very late 19th century, early 20th century type of world that we're moving into. So when you've got a world order where you have all these competing centers of power fighting with each other, it's kind of like or competing for influence. It's a case that when one power recedes, another one is going to probably move in and take their place. So how do you go about maintaining this balance of power between all these competing poles?
Yeah, and that's the other half of it, because Glenn Clark here in the comments in the chat is saying, I'm all for BRICS at this point. Capitalism is destroying everything, but BRICS is capitalism. Putin admits that Russia is run on a capitalist system. Mao Zedong and all subsequent Chinese leaders have been using one or more forms of capitalism. It's all capitalism. They're just different capitalists. And that means, like, their expansive empire wouldn't be better than ours. The whole reason Operation Cyclone happened to begin with, which was a travesty to be sure, and so was like the rest of the U.S. funding, arming, and training the Middle Eastern terror threat, and anything else that they've funded, armed, and trained so that they could pick fights with Russia. The whole idea of like Operation Cyclone and all these paperclip and all these things saying we're going to use these groups against Russia, that's bad. But you know what Russia was doing before the Soviet Afghan before the Operation Cyclone? They were doing the Soviet-Afghan war, which was a long series of massacres. They were already pretty racist against the people there, and they didn't mind how many people were dying. And so, the Russian government is an expansionist empire and has been for a long time. The whole idea of Russia was what?
Their entire history, Russia has a very similar history to the United States. Because we know the United States was settled by Anglo-Saxon colonists, and then they expanded westward across the continent and created a continental empire.
The Anglo-American establishment.
Right. And then the Muscovites, the Rus, they did the same thing in what is now Russia. They expanded eastward and created this continental empire on the Eurasian landmass. So it's very similar history. I mean, the cultures are very different, but the geographical history is very similar. Yeah, but so
is China.
Huh?
So is China. So is every BRICS country. See, I'm all for acting against Western hegemony and empire, but I'm not for Eastern hegemony and empire. And to act otherwise, like so many people do, that's an ignorance of the reality, the material conditions for people on the ground. It's not better for them. It's just different form of the same suck.
Yeah. Well, about 20 years ago, I predicted that the BRICS would eventually rise and challenge the Western hegemony, and they're doing it now. But as far as the BRICS being an alternative, there's a good article about that on the Winter Oak website. It's like a green anarchist website that Paul Kudenek runs. where he talks about the problems with the BRICS, and he talks about how all of these transnational elites, the Rothschild types, have their hands deep in all of that as well. You know, it's like those countries are not independent of the global financial system. You know, it's not like they have their own. You know, they're like some separate sphere of political economy. You know, they're all, you know, the Russians, the Chinese, the Brazilians, the Indians, they're all interconnected with the transnational elites, you know, all of these international financial dynasties and cartels. They have their hands in that stuff as well. And a lot of them are going to be moving. A lot of the transnational elite, like I think Shahid Bolson was talking about this in one of the videos you showed me, Kareem, but he was talking about how the transnational elites now are trying to move more towards the BRICS because they see the BRICS as a rising force and more stable in the long run, which we'll see about that. But
yeah, I personally think, and I've told this to Justin Amash, like the whole, should we worry about, let's like worry about our own backyard. I'm not worried about Xi. I'm not worried about BRICS right now. Interestingly enough, just because I was interested, I did look, and Jefferson Davis was Welsh, Cornish, and Manx. He doesn't have a lot of Anglo-Saxon. And here, my position is simply this. I do want to disrupt, however I can, the ruling class order here first. Let's tackle one empire at a time. I think if we can, you use a confederacy as a building block for anarcho-capitalist and common agorist societies, but you need one first. And the most enlightened people, the most enlightened statists were probably two groups: the General E. Lee and the people who thought like him, and the anti-federalists. And so if we go back to the Articles of Confederation or some configuration like that, we'd be much better. And since we have high gun ownership, I'm not worried about BRICS. I think that's a reasonable.
A question I would have about that is, are Americans today educated enough to know anything about any of that? Because here's the thing. I've seen polls done by reputable polling companies that show that the majority of Americans know literally nothing about anything political other than maybe who the president is. It's like,
which is why you need to start with philosophy. If you don't have liberty. Your confederacy will be more feds. That's fucking it.
Well, I saw a poll some years ago that showed that a majority of Americans, I think it was a majority of Americans, could not name a single right that is protected by the First Amendment. Yeah, they don't even know what. That's basic law. That's some of the most basic law there is. Yeah, it's. But I come across, like with students. I teach undergrads, and I've done it for years. And these are undergrads, social science students, and I'll ask them questions. Sometimes because I'm just trying to probe what they actually know. And I'll throw out questions like, what is the significance of the year 1776 for our culture? Sometimes I will have a whole classroom full of students that have no clue what happened in 1776. Or I will ask them, what century did the Civil War happen in? No clue. I've had
They probably don't even know how centuries work.
Yeah. And these are college students. I've known people personally that maybe had a high school level education that, like, for example, a few years ago, someone asked me this question. They said, Keith, since you're a professor, let me ask you a question, because it was on July the 4th. The date was July the 4th. And this person said, what country did America break away from on July 4th? And because she was saying, well, look, I've got a friend who thinks July the 4th is just some party day where we get together and drink and
technically that is true.
She thought she was smart, right? Because she thought, no, this is the day America separated from another country.
No, it's
she didn't
not.
know what other country, right? So she told me that she asked her mother what country America separated from, and her mother thought it was Germany. And I'm like, well, no, all of that is wrong. All right. I said, America separated from England. And she said, really? And I'm like, yeah. And I said, Google Declaration of Independence, right? And she's like, yeah, I think I remember something about that from school. I'm like, you remember something about that? Yeah, and then she was saying, and then she was saying, so if we were still with England, would we have a king and queen instead of this dumbass Trump? Because Trump was president then. I'm like, no, England today is a parliamentary state. The king and queen are just a figurehead. But it's, I mean, these are not uncommon, attitudes or levels of education. It's not like the people I'm describing now are unusually stupid. I mean,
what do you teach?
Social sciences, sociology, criminology, anthropology, stuff like that.
But question.
I mean, I'm in academia too, though I'm in, molecular biology. So,
students in sciences, I've noticed that students in the hard sciences tend to be better because you have to know something to be in those programs.
I've said before, because it's still a field that's based in reality, it's generally pretty safe from the dumbing down of the country. But
I
mean, the shit that comes out of social sciences departments or liberal arts departments,
No, I've had students. Like in social sciences, we talk about Max Weber's theory about how the Protestant Reformation influenced the development of capitalism. Whenever I do the unit on Weber, I always have to first explain what the Protestant Reformation was, because none of them know, even though most of them are Protestants. I have to explain what a Protestant is, because even though most of them are Protestants, they don't know what a Protestant is. Mm-hmm. I have to explain who Martin Luther was, and no, he wasn't Martin Luther King, and no, he wasn't related to Martin Luther King. And they don't know what he is.
Okay, let me ask you this, though, Keith, because we did say, I think we had a conversation on Facebook, and you said the Articles of Confederation would have been preferable. Not perfect. Okay. I'm not going to educate everybody in philosophy, because clearly maybe some people can't even figure out who Martin Luther is Protestant wise, but I am saying the Articles. Okay.
You have to get people to see that your systems work. I've made this point time and time again.
The Articles of Confederation was the first system.
No, it wasn't. In fact, and the U.S. did not have. No, it wasn't. And the U.S. in fact based its systems off of things like the Magna Carta, and also beyond that, Thomas Paine had a much better blueprint for the future if they actually wanted a free society. But they basically kicked him out of the club because he was saying end slavery and push liberty and make it voluntary. He was essentially one of the first real hardcore libertarians in the Americas. So they told him to fuck off and wrote his name out of the history lessons for a really fucking long time, made him a pariah, because he was saying things like I'm saying, which is you need to prove yourself. You need to hold yourself to the highest standards before anybody else is going to give a fucking shit about you. And this isn't about saying that we have this piece of paper that's going to protect our systems and make the systems good. All we have to do is adhere to this piece of paper. It didn't work with the Constitution. It won't work with the Articles of Confederation. It's not how people operate. You need to do things based on people's actions, people practically acting and doing things for their own benefit. You need to have libertarian structures that you build, like direct action societies, like communes, like networks, like all of the practical ways that we could be building things right fucking now. And we need to build those and make those the model that everybody tries to gravitate toward, so that you don't have to educate them in philosophy, hand them a bunch of dense books or a piece of fucking paper that you say is the Articles of Confederation. What you do is you get these people excited by showing them that it works, and then they will gravitate toward your systems. They're not going to do that if the system that they're doing works already, and they're they get to go home and do Netflix, and nothing you're saying is remarkably different. They're going to gravitate toward the existing entrenched system where they're already invested, where their passwords are already saved, and they don't have to sign up for a new website, where they're things are automatically paid and invested and taken out, and where they just scribble on paper once every few years, and they maybe get a voice in the process. They're gonna keep with this system because they're not educated and because you haven't given them a reason to do better. If
To
we
me-
don't build now the better structures, the things that will actually outmode the state, nobody is going to gravitate away from it. Not because of a book, not because of a YouTube video, not because of a lecture, not because of a course, not because of a, an Articles of Confederation or anything else on a piece of paper. They don't even give a fucking shit about the Constitution. They're not going to care. They're going to care about seeing something that is different, remarkably and radically, that works. Otherwise, it's the same shit, and this already works well enough for them, which is why they don't give a fuck about it now.
I can do both, Jeremy. I can do both. That's what you're missing. We can get the Articles of Confederation, and we can start GoFundMe's for Anarchy House, for Last Repose's Commune, for communes, and for anarcho-capitalists, and for agorist states. That's how I would approach it. I would say, look, we have a confederacy, a confederacy is better because it's agreement of people as opposed to a constitutional republic. That's a good building block
to a government. There were plenty of people in the South who didn't.
I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's a better building block for pan-anarchism than the federal system we have now.
I don't agree.
I don't think these ideas are all mutually exclusive. Like, on one hand, I think that an intellectual culture is important. I mean, you have to have people that have ideas that, philosophical ideas or whatever, that they're motivated by and that are communicated just through education and stuff like that. I mean, every society is like that. You've got, a set of philosophical, foundations and a worldview, so to speak, that is rooted in all of these things. I mean, whether it's Islam or Confucianism or some Catholicism or something or other. So I do think, theory and education and all that is important. And also having some sense of historic tradition or historic practice or whatever. I mean, it's not necessarily wrong to say, well, we're the anti-federalists not right about the problems with the Constitution, or was not Plato right about some of the problems with mass democracy or any of these kinds of things. But I don't think it can stay there, because most people are not intellectuals, and they're not going to be, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. They're just not inclined towards that. So, so it's the practical aspect that, like Jeremiah is talking about, is equally important, because you've got to actually have existing models of doing things that have legitimacy. Like a problem with a lot of anarchists is that, well, their anarchism is basically a few dudes sitting around in the living room smoking weed, watching videos or something, and talking about anarchy. That's I know one thing anarchists, and I'm not talking about just libertarian anarcho-communist type people, just anarchists in general, have a real problem with is public relations, because a lot of them seem to go out of their way to present anarchism as being the stupidest possible philosophy, and why in God's name would anybody want anything to do with it? Mm-hmm. But you have to have a good example. If you look at historic anarchism from the 19th century, early 20th century, they actually did shit. I mean, you had mass labor unions that were anarchist run or anarchist led or anarchist organized. Spain, in the Spanish Civil War is an interesting case. I wouldn't want to copy everything the Spanish anarchists did, but you actually had groups like the FI, which were real anarchist organizations that functioned and were able to provide education about a lot of things. And we're talking about a society where most education was controlled by the Catholic Church. So it was really about trying to brainwash people into subservience to the ruling class. And then you also had this mass labor confederation, the CNT. Then when the Civil War came, you had the anti-Francista militias and stuff like that. Now that didn't turn out too well in the long run, but it was a case of people actually doing stuff. I mean, if you're not doing anything that looks attractive or viable, most people just aren't going to think you're very interesting. I mean,
or even different. Like this is the thing, Kareem. You're all about sales. You're all about trying to funnel. Why don't you tell the average person who doesn't give a fucking shit about politics what makes the Confederacy substantially enough different from the U.S. government that they should give a shit?
You know what? I will. You know what? And for the record,
well, that idea would appeal to some cultural sectors in the United States who have a fascination with all of that. You're like your Civil War reenactors and all that would love it, but it's not something that's generally marketable to the general public. I mean, I mean, most people don't even know about the American Revolution anymore. That's ancient history.
What I can tell people, like at a basic level, is this: like, obviously, I'm not going to go through it. There are people who are self-identified as Dixies who I talk to, and we can leverage that. And they're in the MAGA movement now. We can pull them out for one thing.
How?
And for one thing, I think the most enlightened statist to walk the earth with if there is such a thing, was General Lee. He was.
How do you pull those people out of the MAGA movement? Don't just move on.
Yeah, I tried that a while ago. Like, I feel like the ones that were going to join us already joined us, and the ones that are still there, I don't know.
Like, what are you going to do with them? The paleo strategy? That fucking failed.
No.
Then how do you get the Dixiecrats on your side, or the Dixie like Republicans? In what way? What are you going to do to say vote gold in order to get a confederacy?
No, not necessarily. And that's one strategy.
How then?
I said, look, I can use the same tactic, which is starting to take over local and state governments and then pull them out of the union. And then look, we'll figure it out from there.
But you don't live in Dixie.
I don't.
You live in Pennsylvania, right?
I do, but I have friends who don't like the federal government and want to. They still have the nostalgia of that.
And Trump is their guy.
For now, we're going to make it General Lee. That's what we need to do.
General Lee is dead. Who in the modern day is an alternative to Trump that is on a libertarian anarchist level, who is the same as General Lee, enough similar to get the Dixie fucks on our side?
I guess I'll figure it out myself. How about that?
Like, all I'm asking is, you're being general here. You're not actually being concrete about.
I don't have like a structured plan. It's kind of like I just come up with ideas as an entrepreneur and try stuff and break things and hope things work. But that's how free markets work. So we need to get people to realize the union's illegitimately held together. The South did vote to leave. The Hawaiians need their land back. The Alaskans. We need to get the Joe Vogler movement. If people know who Joe Vogler is, Keith might know who Joe Vogler is. We need to push these movements to disrupt the empire first. Then we can deal with BRICS after that.
Well,
we need to push the philosophy first, or we will never disrupt BRICS or the empire. Go ahead, Rose.
You can do both.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say the fact that, a significant number of people actually think that the current ruling establishment is illegitimate because they think the election was stolen. That actually works to our advantage. They think the current government is illegitimate. So I guess, I don't know if you can kind of, like as far as the secessionist movements go, like if you could kind of get involved with them and push them towards an agorist type strategy, maybe then they could work to our advantage. I guess maybe that's how we could use them.
They did try that in the 70s and 80s, though, and it failed.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of, so when it comes down to it, like, we need to provide a different thing that hasn't already been tried. Not a piece of paper, not a book, not anything like that. We need to provide something that hasn't been tried and put all of our energy into that. Because if we split our energy between statist ends and the anarchist ends, the statist ends will win. Because the statist ends are going to be the ones where most of the legitimacy will be considered poured, and the anarchist ends will be starved out at every possible outlet. That's what's going to happen. The idea that we can arrive at anarchy after this United States, full of a bunch of fucks who endorse the system, splits up and gets to finally do what they've wanted to, uninhibited by the states that have been in some way leashing them and controlling them. The idea that they're going to suddenly become anarchists when they are opposite of anarchists now is asinine. It's not real. There is no anarchist
That's
what?
Definitely true. But I guess they would at least, it would cause the federal government to fall apart because it would no longer be able to extend its power. So it would make it easier, I guess, for smaller pockets of people to split off and form communities.
Until our federal government is brought to you by Huawei.
By what?
Huawei. It's a Chinese tech manufacturing brand.
Okay.
Maybe a joke. So like my whole
I'm
thing
very
is
torn
like,
about the secessionist thing too, and whether balkanization is a good thing or whether it would just make everything worse.
Well, it could be either one.
Yeah.
You could have a better, you could have more polities that came out of it that were somewhat better in terms of content, or it could be like when the former Yugoslavia fell apart, where you had like ethnic cleansing, ethnic civil war between all the different factions that were left. So it's that kind of stuff tends to in real life when a state, an existing state collapses, it's usually a mixed bag as far as the results. Some things improve, some things don't, and a lot of that breaks down on a more localized level. Like the former Soviet Union was like that. Russia proper was a shithole after communism collapsed for a long time afterwards. One of the reasons that Putin is actually relatively popular in Russia is because he's viewed as the man that came in and overcame all the chaos of the Yeltsin years. Like he's like the strong man who stepped up to the plate and said, we're gonna get things back in shape, and we're gonna be Russia. Make Russia great again. Now that's so, and that's a danger too, because when things are chaotic, people start wanting that. They start wanting someone who's going to be in charge and get things running right. And say enough of all this chaos.
Right.
But,
which is
man dictators.
Which is why anyone who is like, and this is the same issue as borders. It has the same issue with the same conclusion as borders, or like abortion that we talked about earlier. They're going to seek the party that is already giving the strong enough messaging here, the strongest messaging here, and Trump, the MAGA people, are the closest to these people and those people in the South and elsewhere who would want national divorce. And those people are the people who believe that the election was illegitimate last time, and they aren't going to like their solution to that is Trump for president. Their solution to that is not fucking libertarian or anarchist for president. We can't win on this issue any more than we can win on the border.
Well, a libertarian president that actually got elected would meet the same fate as JFK.
Yeah, I was gonna say they would end up riding a motorcade in Texas pretty fast.
Or they're a liar like Malay.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're a liar like Malay.
Yeah.
This is piece of shit territory. This is when you get pieces of shit in power because they take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Well, the president is not the real power in the United States anyway. I mean, we see that with Joe Biden. I mean, if the president really mattered, there's no way the wider ruling class would have a dementia patient as the head of state. It's just basically as long as they can pump this dude up on enough Adderall to get through reading a few paragraphs off a teleprompter, that's all they need. That's how important the presidency is. It's kind of a non-issue. But we're talking about questions of anarchist strategy or whatever. I've been dealing with this for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through all the different tendencies. It's like, I was in the IWW, I was in the LP briefly, I was in secession groups, I was in agorist groups, and and left-wing anarchist groups. I've been in all of it, and there's no silver bullet strategy. Every problem, every approach you take, whether it's secessionism, whether it's electoralism, whether it's direct action, whether it's labor union organizing, all these different tendencies that different types of anarchists or libertarians have. Every one of them has their limitations. I don't think there's any one that's going to be a magic formula. You just got to do the best you can with what you have to work with. Right now, if some years ago, I heard a libertarian say that if the LP wanted to really gain in terms of competitiveness, the thing to do would be to pick out some wedge issue that has a constituency, but neither one of the two parties can really effectively address because of their entrenchment, their entrenched commitment to that. Certainly, I think war and central banking would be among those. I mean, the Democrats and Republicans can't just come out and say, no, we've actually decided war is not good. It's that they're structurally and constitutionally capable of doing that. One issue right now that I would say is worth paying attention to is what's happening in Gaza. If we had I know libertarians tend to be at least some are divided on that question, but if you had a prominent libertarian leader making Gaza into a primary issue and saying, well, why is it that the United States is funding Israel while it's engaged in genocide? I think that was certainly something that would start interesting a whole lot of people and what the libertarians had to say, including people who are way outside the libertarian milieu. So that of course there would be pushback against that as well. That's not a consensus issue among libertarians, just like it's not among liberals or any other group.
And again, you gotta go with the issues that you can actually get some traction on, because like first off, I don't think elections work to begin with. But
Right.
let's just, for the sake of like fucking argument, say that they do. Elections are not going to be any fucking like easier if you don't get on issues that make libertarians actually different. And if they're not different, then people are going to go with the entrenched, established candidates who are actually like, they already got the money, they already got the connections, they already got the ad space, they already got the like huge amounts of followers on their social media profiles, they already got all of this, they already got it. They're going to go with the people that they want. Like the people who like are mad that Trump didn't get in and saying everything is rigged because of that, those people are not going to vote for Trump. They're going to vote for Trump. They want Trump because that's the guy that they wanted, and they feel betrayed and snubbed by the system. That's what they're going to go for. So we've got to go for issues and people that aren't going to pick Trump over libertarians. And if that's the case, we have to find issues that those people might be willing to support, but those issues have to be libertarian grounded. It has to be anarchy grounded. It can't be grounded in anything other than that, or we fucking lose. So if your idea is like allegedly minarchist small statism, fractured and balkanized, where the common person is fighting the common person, most people, fucking Republican, Democrat, like normies, most of them are going to say no to that to fucking begin with. And then you get to the people who wouldn't, those people are going to vote Trump. This is a non-issue. It doesn't work in libertarian circles. It's pissing in the wind. What we need to do is we need to build the alternative structures. We need to do the things that make us different. If we don't, we're not different, and the same shit's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the key is building community and practicing counter economics. And maybe, I think the only place I think electoral politics are worth getting involved in are probably at the local level, where you can actually directly influence things, like running for local office for the purpose of nullification. Or, I mean, I know a few people who have done it. Like they run for local office and they just proceed to repeal a bunch of, dumb regulations that make people's lives harder. That, as far as, issues that we should be focusing on, I think, economy and inflation is probably should be our number one, because most people do realize that, life has gotten a lot more expensive. They're not entirely sure why. So that's why I think focusing on the economic issue should be our number one. And then also, war and imperialism, probably our second issue.
Yeah, well, and even if you do get somebody in, just gonna say, like, I'll make this quick. Even if you do get somebody in, reformist politics only encourages reformist politics. That's all. So when, like, let's say you get somebody in, the system is gonna say, see, the system works. So they shove a pacifier in your mouth every now and then, letting you get one of your guys in, and then first off, if that guy fails, the Libertarian Party is a failure. So that guy can't fail, and if he does, he or she, they does, you're fucked for the next long while. That will be the albatross hung around your neck. And then the second half of it is that if they do succeed, the system will tell you that you can operate within the system to succeed. So why the fuck would you change it? And that will make sense to the common person. So the only real way that I can see forward is doing the change, not talking about it, not getting elections, not voting, not campaigning, doing, being a concrete change and a demonstration of the power of actual anarchy. Not saying that if we just form smaller archies, we'll be fucking awesome. There is no power in minarchy. There is no like strength in like, fucking an anarchist sense in getting a whole bunch of balkanize smaller states. If anything, what's going to happen is they're going to be aggressed by foreign entities, and those foreign entities that aggress will prove to these people that, nah, you know what? Gosh darn it, it may have sucked before, but at least we weren't at war with Russo China at our borders and here on our doorstep. And we'll be like fucking, better off if we just, united we stand, join or die, revolution 2.0, except it's to get rid of them commies and get back to our American way of life. America, brought to you by Raytheon and Pepsi. Like that. That's what we're going to get. Because we overplayed our hand on dumb shit that didn't actually change shit and wasn't actually different.
Okay.
I think most anarchist-minded people would agree. So, like, in your opinion, what would be your first step then? Because I think I just get the sense that everyone is waiting for everyone else to do something.
Build something local. Something. And get everybody you know to build something local. That's it. You get something local. You start a food bank, or you work for one that somebody you know is starting. You build a mutual aid society. You build an orphanage. You build a fucking like pothole filling agency. You do this yourself, and you do it regardless of permission. And you build a resilient enough network with your people that you know how to like resist the state and its encroachments.
Okay.
That's what you do. Like, it's because most people, when they think of what the government should address, they're thinking, I'm hungry. I need my bills paid. I need safety. There are like, gangs in my territory. I need. They're trying to look to the government to fill a need. Fill it instead, fill it first, fill it ethically, fill it more efficiently, fill it better, and they will stop seeking the government to do that. That's the only way forward.
Yeah, that was pretty much my thinking. The chair of my county Libertarian Party recently stepped down. So last meeting, we were kind of like, okay, we're not really sure where to proceed. And I'm like, well, what if we start doing things like, being seen out feeding the homeless, or we start running this more like a mutual aid society or something? Because I do think that's the way forward.
Well, there are projects like that. Like there's the Food Not Bombs project is one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know people who are involved in that.
So anyway, I went off. I mean,
well,
this gets me heated.
One thing about that, though, I think that I don't know that really. I'm wondering how much that actually influences people's thinking if they see people doing something like, say, Food Not Bombs, because they may think, oh, yeah, that's a good thing they're doing or whatever. But does it really have the effect of delegitimizing the state? I mean, does somebody say, well, okay, there's people out here from Food Not Bombs feeding the homeless. That's great. We don't need government anymore. It seems like that's kind of a reach that people are going to make that kind of connection.
It's a reach if they don't do anything about it, but they will, because the statist power will fight back against those who are actually doing something that the state isn't, or against the state. So, like, for instance, the legitimacy of the state in terms of protecting people fades when you get to like Food Not Bombs charities having bleach dumped on their food by the cops. And if instead of letting that happen, redacted because I'm on YouTube, then the government would seem a whole lot more like the bad guy, and people defending themselves from it would seem a whole lot more like the good guys. And people might start to do that and be like, you can't pour bleach on this food. We're helping people, and you didn't help them. We're going to take up this slack. Fuck off.
Yeah,
that's how you win.
That act pissed people off enough that there would be people sympathetic if, the people trying to distribute the food had done something about it.
Just saying. Whole lot easier.
Yeah, well, the way people think definitely matters, and I'm thinking about questions like how you have a psychic sea change in the way people think. Like why is it that most people no longer believe in the divine right of kings? Or maybe they do, but if we could go back to the Middle Ages, you would, and you talk to just people, off the street, peasants or whatever. Most of them would probably say, yeah, of course the king rules by divine right. That's how we've always done it, right? Or in fact, like there's this thing. There's a joke is circulated that whenever someone starts criticizing the billionaires, they quote that there's the John Steinbeck quote that Americans think that billionaires are, or I guess they would have been millionaires in his day, but they think the average American thinks that they're just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, meaning they think, well, we shouldn't bash billionaires because we could be one day, but you have the equivalent of that in the Middle Ages, that's where a lot of the fairy tales come from about somebody who just happens to find out, like some peasant that happens to find out that they're actually royalty, they're actually, have royal blood or something, or like the Cinderella story. That's what that is. That's about this poor girl who happens to marry a prince and becomes a princess or something. Because that was for its time within a context of feudalism. That was the idea. Well, you shouldn't bash the rich because you could be rich someday. It's that kind of that way of thinking.
Hey, Game of Thrones spoilers, real quick. I can't think of his name right now. I think it's Joran, if I remember correctly.
I've never seen it. I don't know.
Well, I'm just now watching it. So spoilers, skip if you do not want to hear Game of Thrones spoilers. I will be done in 30 seconds. The Khaleesi, like, she does a whole bunch of anti-slavery action. She's a real, like, one-woman John Brown society. She's killing slavers and deposing rulers and all this shit, and like making the same public display of their corpses, like that they did of the corpses of rebels, right? She's doing all this and milling through all these slave empires because she hates being controlled, so she doesn't want these people to be controlled. And one of the people who was one of her advisors used to be a slave owner. So what he tells her is that if you had done to my people what you're doing to these, I would not be here to advise you. And so she took this reform mentality of, like, she accepted this. She said, tell them you changed my mind and give them a chance to convert to a freedom mentality, or, I'll fucking axe you. And like, so this guy still didn't like that because it still targets him. It still makes him feel all uncomfortable about his place in history. It makes him feel all uncomfortable about how he got where he is, and like how these people maybe shouldn't be given any more freedom than the freedom that they took from somebody else. It really fucks with him. But is she wrong? Fuck no, she's not. She's not wrong. These people got their empires off of brutality, murder, slavery, and death. And the idea that because this one guy might have been negatively affected if she was consistent and historically had power, she shouldn't do it, is dumb cunt shit. You should definitely uproot the power. And the reason I'm bringing all that up is because, like, yeah, there are a lot of people who they benefit. So they're not going to release their clutches, and they're going to resent somebody coming along and saying that, yeah, your system should be fucked. You tell them to go fuck themselves and do it anyway.
Well, I think demystifying institutions is really the key as far as cultural change, because it's like the classic essay Discourse on Voluntary Servitude by Etienne de Bellotay. It's, there's this idea that rulers can only rule because most people go along with it, and most people go along with it because they think it's how things ought to be, or it's all they know. So how do you dispossess people of those kinds of illusions? Like Carl Schmitt said that what the foundation of legitimacy of any state is acclamation, meaning how much do our rulers acclaimed. All right. Well, if there's no acclaim, then they're going to have a whole lot harder time holding on to power. But there's this, so debunking the ideological infrastructure, I think, of any existing ruling class is important. But then that gets back to some of the things that Kareem was saying about, some of these historic traditions and some of these things that are somewhat more culturally familiar, like the Anti-Federalist and all of that. I mean, I wouldn't.
Yes.
Huh?
Well, that the two things, like, I'm in computer science. I look at patterns. I look at future warnings. Patrick Henry and the Anti-Federalists warned that the federal government would become inaccountable and that it would not protect state commerce and that representatives would just go off and do whatever, which that's what my representatives are doing, and they'd have very little accountability because they're in Washington. You don't know what's going on. They're beholden more to lobbyists than their so-called constituents. Also, after Lee lost the war, he said a union held by, the bayonet or the sword will become despotic at home and a terror abroad, something like that, to that effect. And he said he didn't care for a union that was held by the bayonet and the sword, which I think is reasonable. The reason I like these two statists is because at least they said we want to be left alone. Even if someone's doing something I find really reprehensible, or even if someone's not existing in an ideal framework, I can kind of agree with the thing like, hey, this holding an empire together is just going to be bad for the world. Both of these people warn against that. My issue is specifically this. If we can bring back the cultural roots of the idea that a state's its own country, you get one step closer to decentralization. It's not perfect. It gives you a better ground to not only teach philosophy, but to implement philosophy. I can sit here and talk to people about Joseph Pierre Proudhon or Rothbard, and to some extent to Kropotkin all day, but then they'll say, okay, how do you put this into practice with current technology? And I have some ideas, but it's not going to be useful if you don't get rid of the current ideological superstructure first, then build it's kind of like this. If you have a building you want to build, the government's stopping you from the permit. Now, you got to get the government out of the way, or you got to get that coercive force out of the way. Then you can sit there and say, okay, well, I like this type of building. Should I have this? How should we do this? But I want to get the big problem out first, which is the federal government. And we got a Noah. By the way, Noah is a good friend of mine. He's he's King Noah, CEO of Anarcho Monarchy. Are you a king?
No.
You want to be a king? You can get the Burger King crown.
Maybe.
So but that's the thing. If you want to get the big stuff out of the way, the big stuff is people don't give a fuck. You need to make them want to give a fuck. And so ultimately, when people don't give a fuck, making a difference and providing an actual alternate framework is the first step. It's not the next step. It's not the maybe we'll do that after we've gotten our fucking secession. Because a Greg Abbott-led country would not be better for liberty. It would not be closer to anarchy. It would be closer to an isolation of power of the kind of person who's fine with throwing families into razor wire.
But here's the thing. Greg Abbott's less than ideal. But Greg Abbott, at least, here's the way I see things as a spectrum. You don't. You want to see things in absolute, which this is why.
Yeah, because Greg Abbott is absolutely a fascist.
I'm not denying Greg Abbott is a fascist. I'm not a Greg Abbott fan. I'm not like here, it's honestly like I made jokes about like the whole, Abbott and this and that. I'm not a fan of Abbott at all. What I am saying is it's easier to get rid of Abbott or to hold Abbott accountable or to get rid of your state government because it's one step closer. Look, if you live in Texas, your state government is closer than the federal government. I'm not saying that means your local government's even closer. As my friend from the LP so eloquently put it, I said, well, Tim, what's the big deal about? Someone asked Justin Amash. He said, Congressman, you talk about localism. My local government's completely corrupt. I don't really know if this is a good strategy. And Justin Amash, and I agree with him here, even though he's a constitutionalist, said, look, decentralization doesn't fix problems. It just puts the problem closer to you. And yes, we all know someone from a dysfunctional family, which is the most decentralized unit, other than the individual, but we're not giving up on families. Decentralization isn't a magical thing that is going to make Greg Abbott a good dude. It just means, hey, we're one step closer. We're one step closer to you.
You're
And then
not, though. And the reason you're not is because the reason this is all happening is because the federal government is telling him you can't push families into razor wire, and he's saying, nah, I'm defending Texas. This is self-defense. And so many other governors are on his fucking side. This isn't that easy. It's the problem is that he wants to do things that he is not currently allowed to do because the federal government ordered otherwise. And that means that the problem would be harder to solve if he was in charge unilaterally. That means that he would have more unilateral power and less checks and balances. That isn't good. Not if he's not good. And that means that the problem is yet again that he's not good and that these people aren't good and that we need good people or the country will be bad. You can call that black and white thinking, but I'm fucking right syllogistically, logically. You know it.
I don't think it's possible to have good people inside a government.
No, it's not.
So it's a moot point.
I think this. I don't think there's good people. Yes, I think you'll get the predator class when you go for any type of central institution, even at the local level. My solution is to slowly get it closer to you till you can come. Honestly, my solution is this. If Abbott's bad, we both agree on that. Okay, you have a better chance now of local municipalities to secede if it's just a state government. I can actually get something done here.
We're not going to get anything done if people can't be cohesive enough to recognize the bad shit before this happens so that they're seceding from Texas after Texas has isolated complete control over their region. And this is just Texas. The power does not work this way. The Texan government will not say that your local municipality, which just voted for secession, is allowed to leave now. It's not going to happen. And if for some reason the states are benevolent enough to allow everybody who doesn't want to be a part of it for one reason or another to individually fractionalize, that just creates weakness for the governments who fucking won't. Global anarchy or bust. Create the systems now. Don't worry about paperwork or secession or officiality. It doesn't work.
Okay. First of all, in my opinion, it does. And it does simply because of something Rothbard made people aware of. And it's actually, well, I don't know why. I don't know why, you're upset with this. Because like Rothbard literally said in a quote, and this is actually not true. The first part, one concedes that a single world government is not necessary. If you erase the WEF and the globalist institutions and the IMF who believe that, then yes, most people don't want a world government. And the world government's never worked from the time of Alexander the Great. That being said, one does not concede that a single world government is necessary. Then where does one logically stop at the permissibility of separate states? If Canada and the United States can be separate states without being denounced as in a state of impermissible anarchy, why may not the South secede from the United States, New York State from the Union, New York City from the state? Why not Manhattan secede, each neighborhood, each block, each person, each house, each person? And that's kind of the framework I'm going. It's literally from a Rothbard quote.
And I just said why that wouldn't work. And Rothbard was using that as part of a paleo strategy to appeal to rightoid cucks who lose all the time. Mm-hmm. Jesus, fuck. It's not going to work.
I just wanted to
already
stop by and say hi. I'm going to go now.
Hello.
No, hey, we like you, Noah. Hang out. Kyler Nagard wants to give you some Bitcoin or something.
I don't use Bitcoin.
He wants to donate some crypto to you.
You got to get into XMR, caller.
What about Dogecoin?
Yeah.
I don't use any crypto.
Okay. I was using it before it was cool.
Noah exclusively gets paid in metal albums.
Yeah.
But, so, That's my thing. We cannot succeed at this because it has already demonstrably failed.
I think it's going to happen either way. Look, the USSR broke. The USSA will break up. Even
The USSR broke into Russia being what Russia. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. I apologize.
Look, my official position is the United States is too big. The European Union's illegitimate, from David Heath. The USSR broke up. Let these things break and break and break, and then for people who want to listen to you, throw down Proudhon, Rothbard, Hoppe, Kropotkin, and then get on, go or GoFundMe or a decenter and say, hey, I want to start a commune here. Okay, we got land. I need help with an anarcho-primitive society. Okay, we do that here. We do that here. And there'll be less opposition. I don't know. I do things entrepreneurially. I just break stuff and then put it together and hope it works and say, I don't know. Let's see what happens. Then I look at analytics and I'm like, maybe that was a bad idea. And to be fair, if Mao, if all these people, if all these psychopaths can try their systems and I'm not saying like I have agency to do bad things, but if everybody's tried bad systems in the past, nothing's really working all that great. Can we at least? And I'm getting this idea from Rothbard, all these people down. Then I read Failures of Anarchism, and I read the chapter on Keith's book, Why I'm an Anarcho-Pan-Anarchist or Anarcho-Pluralist. I think same thing. And that's the way I see it happening. Secession down to the village, not even to the individual, unless you're a Benjamin Tucker guy or a egoist. Then fine, maybe to the individual, because I don't think. Well, I don't know what egoists think of ANCAPs or ANCOMs. Maybe.
Egoists are much closer to anarchy than a lot of them, because what egoists would say is just fucking do it, even if it's against their fucking invented, made-up rules. Do it because it serves you, not because you got a piece of paper that said we can confederalize.
Okay. Then here's my vision is you break the federal government, you break it in the states, you break the European Union up, you break the USSR, you break BRICS up, you break these things up. Then you go to the state, then you break the state down, then you break it down to local municipalities. Then you try, hey, I want to have an ANCAP society with syndicalist federations. Okay. I want to have an ANCAP society with ANCOM neighbors. I want to have an ANCAP society with primitivist friends because they actually make the steaks better. I don't know. The Hadza are cool and they have high testosterone. Something like that. I'm saying a lot of dumb stuff, but I'm trying to make it humorous. And then you use what was originally governments to say, hey, you're not my ruler, but I just need advice. Hey, Zerzan, are we going too far if we start agriculture? Hey, Derek Jensen, are we going, oh, hey, Jeremy, are we doing agorism right? Hey, whoever is the mutualism guy, is this a good idea? And they kind of not be representatives, but you have the federation, you have guides on, hey, this is a good idea. Okay. Should syndicalists be trying to overthrow ANCAP? It's like, no, hey, dude, be like chill in your union. Like these people are cool. I don't know. That's kind of
see. Here's something I got to respond to because I know Keith wants to say something. Probably Rose does as well, but like I'm seeing a message. Insanity's constant blackpilling is really cringe. I'm blackpilled on the systems that have already fucking failed. The truth is, and this is the real truth, if you want the closest thing to a white pill that I can offer, there are more of us than they have jail cells. There are more of us than they have FEMA camps. There are more of us than they could possibly overwhelm if they wanted to and we were united. That's why we need to fucking unite. Not balkanize, not splinter, not move into separate directions, not, find alternate routes of the same shit that already failed. We need to do what will work and what has demonstrably worked until it was stopped by the state, and that is direct action. Direct action is our future, and we can seize the power if we choose to, but we have to seize it, not ask permission.
Well,
that's not a black pill. That, in fact, is a very positive message. It's saying your freedom is in your sights. Your freedom is with you now. You could have freedom now, and you should have freedom today. And you could go get it when you want to. And you could seize it because you have people in your local municipalities, neighborhoods, states, whatever, who want it now. Get it now. By direct action, I mean exactly what I said earlier. Build the alternative structures. Build that parallel economy. Build that alternative world. Build your own structures to compete with the state. The state, allegedly, fills needs. The state's purpose, allegedly, is to fill needs. People say we need a state because otherwise who would X? The answer is you, motherfucker. You, right here, right now. You do it. Don't ask anybody else to do it for you. Don't ask for permission from other people. Do it. Build those alternate structures. Somebody needs food, build a food bank. Build a food delivery service. Somebody needs help with their elderly family, help them. Somebody needs help protecting the community, you're part of a militia. Build it now. Somebody needs a pothole filled. You build it and then put your nice little paint stamp on it with a nice little ad saying this pothole was filled by Mima's pizza delivery truck. That's what you do. You do it now. You build it now. You don't ask questions. The power is already here as long as you're willing to stand firm and potentially defend yourself against the usurpers and aggressors who have always controlled you, violently oppressed you, turned you into cattle. The power is already there. Do it, motherfucker. That's not a black pill. That's the antidote to the black pill. But the black pill is most people don't give a shit, and most people would rather dick around with federal funding and fucking politics and electoral campaigns and corporations and banks and shit rather than actually fixing the problems themselves manually now. So you need to get those people on board by doing it and making them happy enough with your results that they want to come over, that they see the light at the end of the tunnel that the state has built around them, and they walk toward that light. You be that light and stop being such a dullard in the face of evil. That's what you do. That is not black pilled. That is the antidote. But the black pill is, there are so many people who say that me saying that this other shit hasn't worked is a black pill. And those people are going to drag us down to this level every single fucking time. And that's why we lose.
I'll white pill you real quick. So I have a friend named Ben. I'm going to actually use his name. And he's gone to my shows, like you're talking about my music. Ben's gone to my shows. He's also an ANCAP. He's also a Mises guy. And I've been out to lunch with him. And even before I met Keith, I said, I think there's this thing to bottom unity. And then he said, no. He actively tried to tell me, stay away from that. Don't do it. And then I joked on someone's profile on X that, oh, okay, ANCOMs are cool. And then he said, stop saying anything good about ANCOMs ever again. And I have friends like Lizard Jesus, so I'm not going to say that because I know ego comms and ANCOMs and I like them. And then I said, look, Ben, you want to fight with me on this? Fine. I said, you just do me a favor. Here's EXC, here's Mad Liberty. Pick one of them. By the way, he met Mike and Lizard and he liked them as well. And I said, come into EXC, we're in the voice chat, talk to us. If you disagree, that's fine. I'm fine. Disagree, but just give it one night. Then he hit me up and he also turned me up and said, oh wow, these are the most reasonable leftists I talked to. So for me, if we can get people who are who didn't believe in it before in one conversation at 360, I think there's hope. I think there's hope for pan-anarchy.
Ideally 180, because 360 are just
fair enough. But I'm more white-pilled, definitely. Direct action is starting a garden, learning firearms training. The wood shop like Jeremiah does, but I haven't figured that out yet. I'm not starting a blog or doing podcasts or just talking to people about it. Getting people, pushing the needle a little bit closer, and also, doing your own research and if you're into it, promoting unity, like actually getting people who are legit either anarchists or cousins of anarchists, which I'm cool with. You know, I'm not. I disagree a little bit. Like if someone's a minarchist or a libertarian socialist, or if there are any Henry David Thoreau people, I'm not going to be like, man, you suck, dude. You know you haven't gone full A.
Well, the first anarchists were libertarian socialists, just to clarify.
I think libertarian socialist is not exactly anarchist, but it's close.
It is. Socialism is just like the methodological framework for communist ideas, and comms are ansos. It's the same shit. Like Lysander Spooner directly identified as a socialist. The IWW he was a member of was the same IWW that like originally like formed the basis for like Bakuninite anarchism. They're all this. It's all socialism.
I don't know. Okay,
They would identify as socialists. So I don't think you would want to strip that from them.
I don't know if strip that from them, but okay. Lysander Spooner was a mutualist, right? Like he liked mutual. He believed in mutual aid. I'm not stripping anything from anybody. I think redefining by, and also Keith sent me a good article on it. I can maybe find it, that Joseph Pierre Proudhon as a mutualist isn't necessarily a socialist. He advocates for having private property, but then workers syndicates would be communally owned. That's why I kind of say
Proudhon stated that socialism is every aspiration toward the amelioration of society. And he said, we are all socialists.
Well, the thing about that was back in the early 19th century, the term socialism meant something different than what it means today. Like nowadays, most people, you know, when they hear the term socialism, they think of the Soviet Union or they think of, you know, progressivism like Bernie Sanders and that kind of stuff. But socialism back in the early 19th century, well, it had two meanings. There were a lot of people that adopted the label socialist, and it just meant social reformer. You know, if you were for social reform, you were a socialist. But you also had other people that were sort of like prototypes for, you know, I guess you could say libertarian socialist or utopian socialists. You had figures like Charles Fourier and people like that were prototypical socialists. You also, the first person to actually use the term libertarian was Joseph Desjacques.
Yeah,
he was a French theorist who, I guess, by today's standards, he'd be considered an ANCOM or a libertarian socialist or something like that. Proudhon was the first to call himself an anarchist. But in those days, socialism meant all kinds of things. Like in fact, even in Marxism, like in the Communist Manifesto, I think it's the third chapter, one of the chapters in that, the Marx and Engels are going over all the different types of socialism that were in vogue in that time period, and they're lambasting them all as well. They're not, you know, like only our kind is the right kind; these other kinds are wrong. You know, but they go down this list. We've got the utopian socialist, you've got the feudal socialist, or the clerical socialist, the bourgeois socialist. So it was sort of a euphemistic term for social reform, and a lot of the actual theorists of socialism were more like what they used to call utopian socialists. And some of them had some pretty wild ideas. Like Charles Fourier envisioned having colonies where you would actually have rivers of lemonade and stuff like that. You know, it's like these kind of utopian communes with all these odd features. So it's and you also had reactionary socialists. I mean, you had socialist monarchs like Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was a prototypical socialist. I mean, it was like calling yourself a Christian. You know, I mean, that can mean anything. You know, a Christian could be some Quaker pacifist. It could be a member of the Catholic Phalange. You know, it could be some snake handler,
Mormon, Jehovah's Witness.
Right? Yeah. Now maybe that's the solution. We need a cult of anarchists that go around and knock on everybody's door on Sunday afternoon and say, "Do you know Rothbard as your personal savior?"
I do something similar. Like literally, I had eye problems. I was like basically semi-blind for 20 minutes the other day, and I didn't know why. It started to abate after I took some ibuprofen. That's not the point. The point is that like I I thought it was really bad because it was the worst eye thing that I've ever experienced. So I went to the ER, and first off, they fucked me off for like,
Mm-hmm.
5 hours, and then I didn't get fucking seen at all. So that's fucking excellent. So like I had to fuck off because I wasn't gonna spend until like 4 a.m, because it started like 8, trying to get seen by a doctor for something that had already pretty much abated. I was still concerned. I panicked right before I fell asleep because I thought, I'm gonna fucking wake up blind or some shit. Not the point. This isn't a fucking pity Jeremiah session. The point is, when I was in the ER waiting room, I was having an anarchist discourse session for hours with the people there. I had that opportunity and I took it. That's what people should do. People should not only spread the word in their own personal thing, but also like spend enough of their own personal time, building these structures. Like, you should be an evangelist and the church, both. And you should be a church without walls. Wherever 2 or more people gather in the name of anarchy, so it is there. Fucking do it. Do it. Stop talking about doing it and just do it.
Can we have a Starbucks in the lobby?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I
like
recently had an interesting conversation with this shuttle driver about eminent domain because he lived in an inner city where people from his community had already been screwed over by things like eminent domain so they could build highways through the neighborhoods where he grew up. And in my city, they want to seize a bunch more houses so that they can redo this entire stretch of highway. So we were talking about how unjust it is for the state to come in and seize people's houses so that they can do construction projects. So yeah, I mean, you can just strike up conversations with people and they usually will agree with you if you know how to word things. I find that you have to avoid the use of scary terms like, anarchism or libertarianism.
Well, this is how I've explained some of this to people in a way that seems to work. This is more theoretical, but it's kind of like, and I will say, okay, Alex, ask someone, do you know how the mafia works? And I'm like, and they're like, yeah, sure. They commit crimes. They have extortion rackets. I'm like, yeah. What does the mafia try to do? They try to control territory. They try to control the resources within that territory. They try to exploit the people in the territory through protection rackets, whatever. They have an elite that's artificially enriched through, ill-gotten gains. They use violence to eliminate their competitors. They try to expand their own domain of power and influence and eliminate rivals. And then they even have a cult that's built up to legitimize this. Like when you join the mafia, you take a blood oath and that kind of stuff. And I'll say, now, how is that any different than what the state does? Name one thing that the mafia does that the state doesn't do. Like the state is just the biggest mafia. And a lot of people will be like, well, when you put it that way, it kind of makes sense. All right. Another thing is a lot of people are just ignorant about the crimes of actual states. Like I've asked people before, I would say, why would you not join the Nazi party? And they'll say things like, well, because they're evil. I'm like, why are they evil? And it's like, well, because they started wars and they killed millions of people. Like, well, and then I'm like, well, how many wars do you think the United States has started? How many millions of people do you think the United States has killed? And they're like, well, not that many, And I'm like, okay, let me tell you about some places, the problem is people are often ignorant about what their own society is, how their own institutions work. They don't understand the state is the mafia with the flag, or they think that, well, yeah, the Russians, the Chinese, the Germans, they did all these bad things, but America's basically good, and without having a clue as to what the real history of American foreign policy and international relations are. Most Americans have no clue what an international thug their own government is, and then when you start bringing that into it, you'll say you can ask some questions about things of government forms of government they consider to be illegitimate. Like, why are you not a monarchist? Why do you not favor religious government like in Saudi Arabia? They're like, well, that's not a good kind of government. That's not a fair system or whatever. So it's like they're almost, a lot of people are almost there when it comes to many things. Like most people in modern societies don't really believe that a hereditary aristocracy is an acceptable form of government. They don't really think a religious theocracy. Even people who believe in that, it's watered down. It's they don't really think a military dictatorship is a good plan. They have this idea, well, modern democracy is okay, or the American way is okay, or whatever. They've always got some model state, or they simply think, well, the state's okay if my tribe runs it. It's whatever their team is, red team, blue team, whatever. Dispossessing people of that illusion is one thing, because the idea that your team is going to be the run is, it's just like the idea, well, you should support billionaires because you might be one someday. Like, you should support royalty because it might turn out you're actually got some royal blood somewhere. So maybe you'll be the king someday. It's
well, and like that's very similar to you're atheist to every other god except yours. So why not add that? And it's also very similar. Like, so what I'll do instead of sticking to that particular tag, because I'll use that, right? But like, my thing is, I'm a conspiracy asshole. Like, I'm all about the conspiracy theories. I'm all about I'm going to tell you about some shit you didn't know, and it's going to piss you off. But we're going to come out on the other side of this both hating the same people. So, like, for instance, I told this guy, like, at the hospital, and this is my tactic with everyone, I'm just using this as an example. I told this guy at the hospital about, how, like, because he's an anti-Trump person. So I went on the route of, the fucking Trump is a corrupt person. He's also involved in all these like Hollywood and elite circles. The idea that anyone thought he was different to anyone else is a joke. I'm an anarchist. Here's the long history of the reasons why all of the parties are the same. Here's because we're stuck in the fucking lobby for a few hours, so we might as well. And he's like, yeah, sure. And so this whole thing eventually came down to the fact that, for instance, you want to bring up the Nazis. I brought up the fact that, like, if I was talking to the person in the same way you were, I would have been like, if you wouldn't want to live under the Nazi government, I got some bad news for you. This government and these corporations and banks in this country fucking loved the Nazis and were directly supporting them and taught them everything they knew. How do you like them apples? You don't have a choice not to support the Nazi government because this is a Nazi government, motherfucker. And actually, that normally works reliably pretty well, because they're like, whoa, what the fuck? You mean Chase Bank was helping bankroll the Nazis? You mean the Bush family got like a bunch of Nazi money to fund the rest of their shit? You mean the Nazis helped a bunch of them escape through rat lines and, the Galen organization and Operation Paperclip and the Colonia Dignidad torture pedo colony in Chile and a bunch of other shit that the U.S. directly helped with. And then you get to all these sort of really strong... What?
I was going to say they don't respond, violently to that, because in my experience, triggering that level of cognitive dissonance with the normies just pisses them off.
Yeah, but I do it... See, I'm an asshole, but I'm somewhat of a fun asshole. So like they're like, I want to play along. I want to see where this goes. And so I try to make it entertaining. I try to make it like a fucking movie that they're watching. And I try to like lead them past the right plot points to get to a fun conclusion where in this case, the conversation concluded with him telling his wife to buy him Ted Kaczynski books so that he can read them.
Okay. I guess I just need to be more fun in the future then. Because, I've tried to steer people in that direction and they just usually get angry. Because
we got to
challenges held beliefs, and then they just lash out at the person who made them feel the cognitive dissonance.
One thing that helps is that if you refer people to sources that they think are authoritative or trustworthy. Like, here's an experience I had with that recently. All right, I have a whole lot of people in my family who are evangelical Christians and have a sympathetic view of Israel, right?
Mhm.
So a while back, I was visiting a lot of relatives, and I had some tapes of some of the former presidential candidate for the Constitution Party, Chuck Baldwin, who's also an evangelical minister, right? But he's like an anti-Zionist Christian. So I was playing them some tapes of Chuck talking about the real history of Zionism, where it came from, who the Zionists were, how Israel was started, what the Nakba was, who the Irgun was, who the Stern Gang was, all of the stuff that goes on in U.S. history and in the Middle Eastern history related to Israel and everything that's happened with Israel and Palestinians. And because it was one of their own, because this guy's an evangelical Christian pastor, because the guy was from the Constitution Party, which is like a conservative right wing party, which most of these people are, that then it made sense to them. They're like, well, this is terrible. I didn't know any of this. This is awful. Israel sounds terrible. The Zionists sound terrible. So but if I had brought in, say a lecture, a recording of a lecture from somebody from the Communist Party, they wouldn't have thought that. They would have thought, well, this is just communist propaganda. Why listen to this shit? It's so you got to. Everybody has got a different way in. Everybody's got a different way in.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to meet people where they are.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, I try to take the, attack the left from the left and the right from the right approach wherever possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So,
well, you've been talking like I think the least in this conversation. You
Yeah,
should have like a good go
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
So, is there anything you wanted to add?
no, I'm good.
Yeah, like my whole deal, like I'm all about that. I want these people to know that I'm right, not just accept it grudgingly because they have to or because the new government structure says they should. I think that people need to be convinced on a personal level, and what helps with that, like let me just you've got homeless veteran. He's outside of the Walmart. He's got a sign. He's disabled. You're looking him in the face and you're telling him, I don't like the government. Here are all the reasons. That homeless veteran might listen to you. But that homeless veteran is going to listen to you a whole lot more if you put some money in his cup. That homeless veteran, an orphan, a fucking adult or child orphan, a fucking widow of a war, fucking somebody hungry, somebody who needs health care, somebody who, etc. If you, instead of just talking about what's bad, also fill the need that they think that the government is there to fill, you can prove a lot of these people, you can prove to them that the government was always an inadequate mechanism for filling this need. And you can move forward on much more positive grounds. And it's the same thing with all these other things. Like, if you are just going to say your needs are wrong and the government is bad and you're bad for supporting them, they're probably not going to listen to you. What you got to do is you got to say, I get that you need this. I get that there's a need. I get that there's something that's being done by the government that you think is necessary. Here's how we could do it differently to the government. Not here's how we could get a different government. That's already been tried. It fails to produce anarchist results. But how do you, here's a thing that we can do that's not government, that's different. And here's how you can help. They'll be like, fuck yeah, all hands on deck. Let's get rid of this corrupt system that's been keeping me down and keeping me a subject of an evil empire. So that's my strat. My strat is to tell them not only this is the problem, but here is a solution. Because if you don't, these people are... So meeting them where they're at, you need to acknowledge, for instance, don't just call them welfare whores. Don't call them a migrant flood. Don't call them, high crime urban youth that need to be brought to heel. Don't fucking treat them like shit and pander to them and treat them like the government treats voters. Treat them like actual human beings with real human needs, and maybe we can move forward. It's like You know how fucking Sal the Agorist, allegedly, Sally Mayweather, has been pushing Javier Milei because those police are finally giving them commies what they deserve. And I know he doesn't sound like that, but he basically sounds like that now.
Gee,
You
it
know,
could possibly go wrong.
yeah, right? And like, those people aren't commies. They're normal fucking people. I cannot stress this enough. They're mad because Javier Milei is installing a facial recognition superstate, banning certain forms of protest, funneling people into fucking jails at higher rates. He halved the value of the Argentinian peso and enabled purchases in foreign currency, which effectively means that it's like 200 times what the cost of living used to be, which means that these people are protesting economic conditions that any libertarian, if Biden did it, would call him a commie. But they're not calling Javier Milei a commie because they don't know what commies are, and they don't know what fascism is, and they don't know that Javier Milei is a fascist engaging fascism because they hate the left more than they love liberty. And because they're willing to dehumanize these people enough to say that they deserve to be thrown out of helicopter and commies aren't people and it doesn't matter what happens to them because this is the consequence. You voted for statism, you're getting statism. This is what you... Fuck you. That's not how we went.
That's bullshit. Oh, you voted? No, people voted for what they thought was the lesser of two evils because that's how our system is designed, okay? People are funneled into voting for one side or the other. So, yeah, that definitely bothers me, the whole, oh, well, you voted for this bullshit.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, commies is just their, like, a lot of these libertarians go-to insult. They'll just say, commie, 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 commie. They don't care if they're actually communists. They don't care about the conditions on the ground. They are jacking off about their fucking foreign dictator who's like an ANCAP libertarian type, and they don't fucking care that he's actively engaging in fascist techniques and to a fascist result. They don't care, what's actually happening to these people, or whether or not they could see humanity in them to see things forward and maybe understand why they're protesting. They're just like, this guy is a representative of my camp, and I'm a campist, and I'm a cunt, and I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
That's evil, and that's not how you win. You win by recognizing what these people think they need that the government is now stopping them from getting, and you help them with that. You don't just dismiss them as commies and like support the police beating them. You don't unleash the cops on the homeless and the bums. You don't fucking engage in this paleo strategy nonsense with the Texas border razor wire fucking fascist fiasco as your new pet project. You don't do that. You don't say secession is the goal and Texas should secede. You say we need a better world. Here's how we build it. Join me.
All right. Well, I agree with all that, except you throw acorns, and then I think you can defeat the cops. They're like, "Oh my God, acorns! They're falling! Help!"
Yeah, I heard jokes about acorns and cops. What happened with that?
Oh, there was an acorn that hit the top of a cop car, and the cop falsely accused the suspect handcuffed inside of having opened fire on him, and that he got hit when all he got was a spook from a little pop noise that on the roof of the car. And so he did a barrel roll, mag dumped into the car, said that his partner fucking said that that like she just mag dumped as well. And fortunately, the innocent person inside, who did not in fact shoot anyone, was unharmed because the cop car took all the rounds, because these two pieces of shit were trigger happy and should never have been behind the tin. But hey, acorns.
It's only because no one died, but wow.
Yeah.
It's honestly pretty terrifying.
Yeah, and just gonna say the only kingdom that matters is the kingdom of Acorn.
Yeah,
gotta be that way.
And a narco-monarchist, someone. Actually, you know what? To be fair,
are those a real thing? I mean, every single one I've encountered has been a troll who thinks they're being original, but it's actually the most common anarchist troll I've ever seen. So, are there actually real ones?
I mean, I'm looking for one. Maybe I'll become one. I'll become one. I'll be king of the new American Confederacy.
I mean,
I've seen every idea there is every idea there is, I've seen somebody put an anarcho hyphen in front of it.
I think my favorite is ANCAP Stalinism.
Yeah. I've known people who call themselves anarcho-national Bolshevik,
Yep.
anarcho-fascist. What are some others? Yes, I mean some really weird ones. Yeah,
Other anarcho Zionists, I'm guessing. Like, man,
well,
Yes.
Walter Block is one.
Yeah. So and like so that's the thing. Like, we need better messaging if we're ever going to reach people into a libertarian message. So, like, for instance, the Libertarian Party is schmoozy enough with conservative cuck circles that they recently, like, fully fucking, like, supported a tweet by Wall Street Silver, where Wall Street Silver, at a conservative account that regularly gets boosted by conservative accounts, said that Canada was like legalizing drug sales and you could just walk into stores and buy drugs. And no, in fact, Canada wasn't. And the brand on the box was literally the Drug User Liberation Front, who fucking got arrested routinely for doing this. What they would do, which is actually based, is they would buy drugs on the black market, and they would take these drugs on the black market and test them for safety.
Mhm.
And then they would resell these drugs from the black market that they got tested for safety at, like, universities, and then they would resell them. And they would make sure that the drugs people consumed were at least somewhat safe, comparatively to the cut and buffed drugs. So you would get a package that says no cut, no buff. And you would be able to reliably get, like, and so a bunch of people that were trying to quit and who didn't want to die in the process of weaning off, those people were sent to compassion clinics. I think they had 45 customers the last time that they took a tally. And these people were getting their like needs met by people who were just doing it. And those people were routinely arrested for it, because they were doing something that mattered to them, trying to make their communities better, cleaner, trying to prevent injuries and overdoses and death. And they were trying to do that. And the Libertarian Party didn't look into any of that. They just said, good, legalize it all, pretending that Wall Street Silver was right. They weren't. And a bunch of right fucks in Wall Street Silver's mentions and quote tweets and all this other shit were barreling on board saying, Canada's lost, this is Trudeau communism, blah, 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 left, blah. No, in fact, it never was, and the story was false, and Community Notes later said what I said like 7 hours before Community Notes said it, because I'm way faster than they are.
They were mad at the idea of the drug war being ended?
No, the people in the comments were.
Oh, okay.
And a bunch of people who are used to... What?
Oh, no, never mind.
Well, I think
a bunch of people who are used to the Libertarian Party's conservative messaging were like saying that the Libertarian Party sucks, Canada has fallen, all this shit, because they're used to the Libertarians cucking to the right. And I can talk about another example of that, like, relatively shortly. But what was that, Keith?
Well, a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that we have this culture war thing where people just instinctively attack whatever they think is the opposite tribe in a way that's completely thoughtless. Like, we saw a lot of that during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Like, you could automatically determine what somebody's position on pandemic policy was based on their political affiliation. Okay, well, if they're, right leaning, they probably want to have fewer COVID restrictions and no masks or whatever. If they're left leaning, they want to have more. And I don't know that there's even any inherent logical reason for that. I mean, those aren't really liberal conservative issues per se. You could just as easily be a law and order conservative who says, well, we've got to have strict laws to keep, COVID from spreading or whatever. It just seemed to be total tribalism that was totally irrational. It's like sports teams. It's like you put on the jersey of whatever team you think is your favorite, and it's not like there's anything even inherently wrong with the other team. It's not like they've really even done anything to you. You just, it's like you just hate fans of the Dallas Cowboys or whatever because they're fans of the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, well, and so, Sam, I see you in chat there. I'm going to link you to the fucking tweet in question. because I think you will find this funny, because the Libertarian Party was just absolutely immediately co-signing this, and it's pretty fucking atrocious that they saying that, you know, not that the West has fallen, but they were co-signing that this was true without doing any research into it at all. And so I'll tag you because I see you on Twitter. Also, feel free to follow me. I follow back. But basically, like, they co-signed this, and also like the Libertarian Party, because a lot of right-wing fucks are on board with AI. The Libertarian Party took an official partisan position supporting AI. They came out and on their official Twitter account supported AI and said that anybody against it was against the tide of creativity and like against the future. This is why does the LP have a fucking official position on AI?
Well, that's just the person running the official Twitter, so doesn't necessarily reflect the position of the party or the various chapters of it. It's kind of the problem with the LP. Like, as long as you get, like, if you can get involved in, you know, a state chapter or a local chapter, and you can get control over their Twitter account, and then you can basically release tweets that are considered official, but they may not actually be shared by the majority of your fellow libertarians.
Gotcha.
Like, there's no real official position on most of these things.
Yeah.
That's why I got involved in the platform committee, because I'm like, okay, they need better messaging, so might as well get involved and see if I can at least, you know, help ensure that, you know, the planks are reflective of actual libertarian positions.
Hey, whoever you are in chat, that's a stupid answer. First off, I'm not Luddite because I'm opposing fucking AI. AI in its forms has long been an extreme problem and mostly used by the state. It's not Ludditism to oppose a technology that is currently being used to oppress you. And the second thing you said that was stupid is that banning technology is stupid, because I didn't suggest banning it. I said the LP shouldn't have an official fucking position. So don't put words in my mouth. Don't talk about things that I didn't say and then say they're stupid, because that's stupid. You're being stupid.
Well, doesn't the LP have a leftist faction as well? Isn't there something called the Libertarian Socialist Caucus?
Yeah, there's a LibSoc caucus. I don't. They don't really have much sway anymore, but unfortunately, most of them were not actually consistent LibSocs. At least not the ones I've encountered. Most of them were just generic, you know, rad libs at best. Who, you know, the vote blue no matter who types. So,
Okay.
yeah, it wasn't really. I don't know. I'm not sad to see them having been driven out of the party, personally.
Okay, so the Libertarian Party is interesting because there's a lot of different ideas. There are different factions. There's people with different thoughts. Like, even when it comes to AI or the thing, you're going to get a million different opinions. There's some things, at least, we are pretty good on, but the issue I do have is, you know, sometimes we can't just worry about important things. We got to fight over this and that. And I really think, you know, we should just kind of work on, like I said, central banking, fighting war, inflation, other stuff like that. Important issues, not like, you know, okay, well, my AI or this or that or the other thing. But to be fair, the Libertarian Party is way better than the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. So we have that going for us. We're the third largest party. I do think
we rape people twice as less than the two other rapists. We did it.
Anyway. Actually, we don't. Hey, that, you know, if we're gonna make this argument, I would even say this to top lobs that, you know, oh, people can do whatever they want, and it's a slippery slope to that. Look, there are no libertarians that I knew that went on Epstein's Island, so I think that's a significant difference. That being said, we're human and we're not perfect.
Yeah, instead of supporting the people on Epstein's Island, they have Andrew Tate, with Clint Russell openly endorsing Andrew Tate, and with Thaddeus Russell,
part of the LP again,
and with Thaddeus Russell and Clint Russell getting public speaking engagements, sharing with each other, and with Thaddeus Russell endorsing adult child sex with Stephen Kirshner, and
Okay.
with Thaddeus Russell also having Scott Ritter, twice convicted child predator,
I
as
don't.
a bonus feature on his Patreon. This guy is huge in libertarian circles.
I don't agree with any
Instead
of
of
this.
saying that
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about all of that. Like,
We're
I know that
divided on Andrew Tate.
actually endorsed Andrew Tate. I don't know.
he did. I have a whole thread about it.
Endorse
He has,
Andrew
he
Tate,
has nothing.
I read
He,
it.
he has nothing but good things to say about Andrew Tate.
but Andrew Tate is technically not okay. Andrew Tate's
No,
not.
he is. He says he's a libertarian.
Great. Just what we need.
Where do you find this? I'll look at his Twitter. I don't think he says he's a
He
libertarian.
said it in an interview. He said, "I'm a libertarian." I can
Okay.
find that, but like the
Okay.
general.
God damn it, that's annoying.
You know who else says he's a libertarian? I'll get you with this. Ben Shapiro. I've heard Ben Shapiro say, I'm a libertarian.
And
I'll
a
be like,
ton of libertarians support the Daily Wire.
I don't.
Okay, you don't need to for that to be true.
These
We've got
people have
systemic
never read
rot.
any libertarian theory. It's so irritating. They call
Yes.
themselves libertarian because it sounds cooler than conservative, but
Like,
Yeah.
and
they're
that's
the first ones to call me a commie when I actually argue with them.
Yeah.
yeah, and like that's the thing. Thaddeus Russell is fucking huge, and anyone affiliated with him is like actively like anyone supporting him is actively supporting a twice convicted child predator who is part of his Patreon pledges. It's actively supporting his views on adult child sex
I
and how
am
it's
not-
not different to children competing in fucking sports.
Okay. I don't like Thaddeus Russell. I don't like Andrew Tate. I don't like any of these people. And I will say this, at least the Daily Wire, Candace Owens had Norman Finkelstein on, and I think Norman Finkelstein's a pretty well-read guy. He's been doing research since the 70s
Yeah,
and 80s.
For one episode, while Michael Knowles is calling for the eradication of trans people to the thunderous applause of CPAC.
I don't like Michael No. Look, here's the thing. At the end of the day, we're all individuals. Just because somebody said, like even today, Michael High said there's overwhelming support for Rectenwall. I said, oh, hey, I like Rectenwall, what some of his takes, but I'm not in love with Rectenwall. If I had to pick down to it, I'd pick Spike. If not, Josh Smith. So for me, it's not. This is not the flood in Halo.
I'm not saying you're a monolith. Just to be clear,
Yeah.
I'm not saying if I thought you were a monolith, I wouldn't get along at all with Rose. I wouldn't get along at all with you. I'm not saying the LP is a monolith. I'm saying they've got problems to solve before they're going to be anything different and anything substantially fucking better. They've got problems to solve. They've got to get away from these status like linchpin issues and focus on the things that could actually substantially reduce the government in a way that people will be approachable to, and in a way that will seem different enough that they don't just want to go to the Republicans or Democrats like they always do.
Yeah.
So they need to get rid of people like Thaddeus Russell instead of pretending that they're not there. The fact that somebody hasn't been to Epstein Island does not mean that they aren't supporting Andrew Tate, who groomed a 15-year-old girl into a sex cam business with a bunch of other people he sex trafficked. This is a problem everywhere. Everywhere has their own version of Epstein Island. And you know what? Just to be real on the nose about it, a lot of libertarians are copter cuck little bitch boys who support Pinochet because they can jack off thinking about throwing commies out of helicopters. And those people support a dictator who directly worked with a man who had a colony which pedophilia and rape of children and women happened at an unprecedented level. And that guy was worse than Epstein in every possible way, every way, and more. And so they can support that guy. They support Epstein plus. They support Epstein worse. They have no business speaking against Epstein if they are going to support a dictator who had somebody worse and was an actual Nazi under his employ. And that guy was shuttled out during the rat lines by the US government, who also helped fucking install the dictatorship of Pinochet. These people who support those things are no better than people who make excuses for Epstein, but they morally virtue signal because they're of a different party. It's fucking pathetic. And those people are everywhere in this movement. So these people have their own Epstein. And they jack off about it. They make merch about it. Austin Peterson sells fucking shirts saying Pinochet was right. Was he, you fascist pedo fuck?
Yeah, I'm not, and to be fair, yeah, I'm not a fan of any of those idiots either. Here's the thing, and I'm even trying to red pill some libertarians, which I don't know if you utilize that term or not, but a lot of people are saying, well, communists are bad. I'm like, okay, but define communists. Oh, and then they usually go, a generic name or something. But is communal ownership bad if you can maintain it well? Twin Oaks isn't falling anywhere. So I am getting people slowly, give it time, I'm getting people slowly to say, wait, ANCOM is the real thing. Communal ownership like Kropotkin thing. And that's not bad. We can work with those people. And Ben.
Very cool.
And if you watch my episode, which Mike yelled at me that I did not put them in Mad Liberty, if you watch that with Ben, Shut the Punk Up, we talked about that, and I said, look, there's a lot of ANCOMs in punk circles, particularly. And I'm starting, I'm building bridges with them, trying to build bridges with the ANCOMs. That's the way I see going. So give it some time to flip, and it will. We can get the Pinochet out of the right. We can get the Stalin out of the left, or the Tanky or comrade. Stalin was not a comrade anyway. He was a dickhead. And it can happen over time. And then we can build a counter. I've talked to other people who'd like to eventually build something, maybe a counter type schooler thing to Tate. So yes, that can all be done. Now, obviously, it'd take time, but I have ideas for those things, and also engaging in philosophy and engaging in different discussions. And you've seen some of the threads. I did start to push back. Before I'm just like, whatever. And I'm like, no, wait, tell me exactly what you mean. Them commies are bad. Well, I don't know. It's just something, it's kind of almost a knee-jerk reaction, like just push button. Ooh, commies are bad. Why? Well, I don't know. Because someone told me they're bad.
Most of them think Joe Biden is a communist. So, yeah, I've definitely argued with libertarians who are like, oh, but he's a Marxist. It's all here in the Communist Manifesto. I'm like, no, he's a neoliberal. I can assure you that J.P. Morgan Chase does not want to abolish private ownership.
No. But
yeah, no, I mean, I came from ANCOM punk circles. So, yeah, I definitely agree that we can recruit them.
You know who's not a communist? Karl Marx.
Really? Interesting take.
Well, no, if he were here today, he'd be considered an ultra-rightist if you actually look at what his opinions were about a long list of things.
Like on social issues, you mean?
Well, in a lot of things, it's
yeah. And, what do you have to say about LaSalle, maybe?
About what?
LaSalle.
Yeah. If you look up some of Karl Marx's opinions about race, about what used to be called the Jewish question, homosexuals, it's he'd be considered an ultra conservative, a far right today.
Yeah, and you would be considered a part of a red-brown alliance if you worked with him. Like, I don't like his conclusions or the extent of his. So the whole thing is, I think he was an Othcom, but Kareem and I are basically on the same page with regard to the reasons he says that. So at least there's that. But just I don't know. This has been going on for 3 hours. I'm assuming y'all just want a book at this point. So, I don't know. Like I've said so I guess we'll talk gun control and Drew Pinsky on another day because this was all LP noise. So
right. I forgot about the gun control thing.
Yeah, but it's fun. I don't think y'all want to go for another couple hours talking gun control and Drew Pinsky. But maybe we can talk about that on
What's
Wednesday?
The issue with Drew Pinsky? That's the guy. Drew Pinsky is the Dr. Drew guy, right?
But now he's just a fascist who sells
Wait.
like fucking conservative, like, yeah, he's supporting like fucking evil shit now.
What? No.
Yeah, he has a talk show where he'll have all these fringe figures on, and some of the people who come on, he just 100% agrees with and co-signs them, and gets people on to yes man them while they spew fascist garbage. And like one of the people that like really pissed me off today was a guy who was a relative of the co-founder of the WEF. And I got like, I'm interested. I want to hear what this guy has to say. This might be interesting. And it fucking wasn't. And I'm going to talk about why on some other day, because I could just like mill on. But basically, like, he got like started on the WEF, and then the rest of it, probably like 55 minutes out of the hour, was spent talking shit about trans people, wokeness, the left, claiming Trump is like in charge still because of some secret military plan. Dr. Drew had this guy on his show and just let him talk. So yeah,
not hear any of this. Wow.
So we'll talk about that Wednesday, I guess, if that works for y'all. I don't know. Does that?
I remember Dr. Drew when he had that program with Adam Carolla years ago.
Yep.
He was big on the Iraq War back then. So he was basically a neocon.
Mm-hmm. And now he's a fascoid. So,
Well,
yeah. Does Wednesday work for y'all?
From him, but wow.
Yeah. Sorry, the lag is bad. So if I did an interruption today, I apologize. Just does Wednesday work for y'all? Wednesday evening?
Let me see what I'm doing Wednesday.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know yet. It depends.
All right. Well, if like someday this week, because like I've got so much to say about this fucking Drew Pinsky situation, and the gun control shit that's been coming out, because like there's a shit ton about gun control that I've been wanting to sort of cover. So I figure I can talk about that, and everybody can bring their own shit about both, whatever the subject is.
That shooting that, the breaking news from today where there was, I guess, a couple of cops that were shot. Yeah, because of course, this is going to be jumped on as yet another excuse to push gun control.
Yeah.
Is this the thing?
Meanwhile, the guy,
fighter, right, that got shot.
EMT, yeah. Yeah, and like fucking obviously nothing about that has come out. But like the guy, his motives, none of that matters. This is one of those situations that they're going to really bury because they just want you to focus on dead cops. But yeah, that'll be, I guess, a teaser, because I'm pretty sure everybody is tired. I fucking exhaust people for a living. Y'all can find me on fucking social media. And yes, I have a Discord server. You are welcome to get a link. I don't know who you are, though. What is your name elsewhere? You're in Japanese. I cannot read that. I know my limitations. I mean, I could translate it, but I'm pretty sure that you would be in Japanese elsewhere as well. I'm pretty sure you didn't come from my content. I don't know. I don't know which page you came from. But yeah. I mean, my message is clear. Just start doing it instead of waiting. No waiting, no process, no paper, nothing.
All right. Well, with that being said, that was a good discussion, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
No problem. You're the patron saint of libertarians.
Mm-hmm.
And Keith, it's always a pleasure. All right.
Good night.
And me, it's always a displeasure.
All right.